Hey friends! Glad you're here at No Harry, we've cooked up something special. What if Daphne kissed Harry on platform 9 3/4 and Slytherin blood magic made him lord of 5 noble houses? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The accident on the platform. The Dursleys dropped him at King's Cross like they were disposing of something embarrassing. No goodbye. Vernon kept the engine running. Petunia stared straight ahead through the windscreen with the particular blankness she reserved for things she'd decided didn't exist. Dudley was eating crisps in the back seat and managed, for once in his considerable life, to ignore Harry entirely. The boot popped open. Harry dragged his trunk out himself, wrestled Hedwig's cage onto the trolley, and by the time he straightened up, the car was already pulling into traffic. He watched it go without any particular feeling. He'd stopped expecting things from them a long time ago. Expecting things from the Dursleys was like expecting warmth from a stone floor, technically possible if you waited long enough and the sun hit at the right angle, but not something you'd build your day around. He turned to face King's Cross station. Right. Platform 9 3/4. Somewhere between platforms 9 and 10, Hagrid had said. Run at the barrier. Don't stop. Don't think too hard about it. Harry had been thinking about almost nothing else for 2 months, so thinking harder about it wasn't really an option. He pushed the trolley through the main hall, weaving between commuters and tourists dragging rolling suitcases, watching the signs overhead until platforms 9 and 10 appeared around a bend. He found the barrier between them and stopped. It was just a wall. Grimy brick. A pillar, really. There was a woman in a tartan travel cloak shepherding 3 red-headed boys through it, no, 4, counting the one who'd already vanished, and Harry blinked because it happened so fast. One moment the boy was there. Then the wall swallowed him and there was nothing but brick again. Right, Harry said to himself and Hedwig, who clicked her beak with what he'd decided to interpret as moral support. He lined up the trolley, took a breath, and ran. The wall dissolved. The noise hit him first, steam engines and shouted farewells and the long, mournful whistle of a train that somehow sounded ancient and alive, and then the scarlet locomotive came into full view, and Harry's chest did something complicated that wasn't quite happiness but was adjacent to it. Something that felt like recognition. He slowed the trolley to a stop and just stood there for a moment, taking it in. The platform was heaving. Families in robes, children in school uniforms, owls and cats and one extremely reluctant toad being recaptured from under a bench by a round-faced boy who looked close to tears. Trunks stacked everywhere. Students calling to each other across the crowd, reuniting after summers, new first-years hovering at their parents' elbows looking like they'd stumbled into a dream they hadn't decided yet was good or bad. Harry started pushing his trolley toward the luggage compartment at the front of the train. He was watching a pair of 6th-year students levitate their trunks aboard, idly, enviously. He hadn't learned that yet, when the trolleys were caught on something. He looked down. Nothing. Looked up. Also nothing. And then someone collided with him from the left at considerable speed and the trolley spun 90 degrees and Harry went sideways into a stack of someone else's luggage and came down hard on one knee with his elbow hitting the platform edge, and someone, landed mostly on top of him. He had an impression of dark hair, a flash of pale green robes, and a sharp inhale of breath that was almost certainly not his. The world reorganized itself. Harry pushed up to his hands and found himself face to face with a girl roughly his own age, dark blonde hair, gray eyes currently wide with what he was fairly sure was more indignation than injury, and a split lower lip where she'd apparently caught the edge of his trolley handle on the way down. They were approximately 4 inches apart. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, not embarrassment, not quite anger, something more calculating than both, and then the blood welled from her lip and she made an irritated noise and reached up to press the back of her wrist against it, and her hand brushed his cheek on the way, and the split lip touched the corner of his mouth for the space of 1/2 second. Something hit him. Not physically. Internally. Like something very old had been sitting in a locked room inside his chest and the door had just been kicked off its hinges. Heat and pressure and a sound he felt rather than heard, a low resonant thrum that vibrated through his back teeth and down his spine and into his hands. He rocked back. The girl rocked back too, and for a moment they just stared at each other, and Harry could see that she'd felt something as well because the indignation had gone entirely blank, replaced by a careful, measuring stillness that looked like someone conducting a rapid internal audit. "You should watch where you're going," she said. Her voice was perfectly composed. Harry was still processing the fact that something seismic had just happened in his ribcage. "You ran into me. My trolley will caught on a crack in the platform. Same thing that happened to mine." She looked at him. He looked at her. Her lip was still bleeding slightly and she pressed her wrist to it again and something else happened, smaller this time, a pulse rather than a wave, and Harry felt it in his scar of all places, a warmth instead of pain, which was so far outside his experience of that particular scar that he almost touched it instinctively. Daphne. A boy appeared behind her, tall for their age, dark-skinned, sharp eyes, Italian features, wearing robes that said his family had money in the same quiet way that certain buildings say their architects were never once worried about cost. He took in Harry, the scattered luggage, Daphne's lip, and arrived at some private conclusion so fast it was barely visible on his face. "Are you all right?" "Fine." She was already standing, smoothing her robes. "Blaze, my trunk." "Your trunk is where it was." The boy, Blaze, looked at Harry with open curiosity that was clearly the more honest of the two of them. "You're Harry Potter." "Yeah," Harry said, getting up and checking that Hedwig's cage hadn't tipped. She was glaring at him. "Sorry about the crash," he said to Daphne. She glanced back at him once. Just once. Something moved behind those gray eyes and then it was gone. "Mind your trolley," she said, and walked away toward the train, and that was that. Except it wasn't, because the thing in his chest didn't go away. It settled. It unpacked itself, slow and patient, like it had all the time in the world, like it had been waiting for an occasion and this was apparently it. Harry loaded his trunk, got Hedwig situated, and found a compartment near the middle of the train. A red-headed boy found him 20 minutes later, Ron Weasley, younger brother of the four from the barrier, who told him on the platform that he didn't need to be nervous because everyone felt weird their first time and also that Harry Potter was genuinely real and not just a story, which Harry found both reassuring and slightly exhausting in equal measure. Ron was easy company. He talked about Quidditch and his brothers and the castle and ghosts without requiring much from Harry, which suited Harry fine because part of his attention was sitting somewhere else entirely, probing the edges of that interior shift like a tongue checking a bruised tooth. When a bushy-haired girl stuck her head in looking for a boy with a toad, Harry was almost grateful for the distraction. She gave Ron's smudged nose a brief, professional assessment, told him it hadn't worked, he'd been attempting a spell from a third-year's joke book, and then she looked at Harry and said, "You're Harry Potter. I've read all about you." And then she sat down without being invited, opened a book, and the three of them were apparently traveling together now. Her name was Hermione Granger. Harry liked her immediately, the way you like people who don't waste time on preamble. The countryside scrolled past. Ron ate 3 sandwiches. Hermione corrected both of them on several pieces of wizarding history. Harry ate a chocolate frog and almost missed the card inside, which was Dumbledore, and he sat looking at it while Dumbledore's half-moon glasses winked at him from the moving image and felt, for no reason he could name, slightly uneasy. The train slowed. Outside, darkness had fallen and rain had started, and through the window Harry caught his first sight of Hogwarts, not the full castle yet, just the lights through the trees above the lake, but even that was enough. He put the card in his pocket. The thing in his chest pulsed once, steady as a heartbeat, and then was quiet. Hagrid's boats. The Black Lake. The castle rising through the rain with all its towers lit, looking less like a building than like something that had grown from the rock over centuries and was simply continuing to grow. Harry sat in the boat with Ron and Hermione and a girl he didn't know yet, and he thought about the cupboard under the stairs, which was the thing he always thought about when something was too large to process directly. The cupboard was easy. The cupboard was concrete. It had one bare bulb and a crack in the doorframe where he'd been able to see light from the hallway, and he'd learned every detail of that crack over 11 years because that was all there was to learn. He wasn't in the cupboard. He was here. He was going somewhere that was apparently his. He'd had a letter that said so. The boat touched the dock and they filed up the stone steps and he stopped thinking about the cupboard because the inside of the castle hit him like a physical force, warmth and torchlight and the smell of old stone, and something in the walls recognized him. He felt it. A subtle vibration, like the building itself was aware of his footsteps in a way it wasn't aware of anyone else's. He shook it off. He blamed the blood pumping in his ears. McGonagall met them, explained the sorting, and led them into an antechamber to wait, and Harry stood in the cluster of first years and noticed, without particularly meaning to notice, that Daphne Greengrass was standing at the back of the group with Blaise beside her, and she was watching him with the same careful, calibrating expression she'd had on the platform, and when their eyes met she looked away first, which surprised him. The sorting began. Names were called. The crowd in the great hall applauded by house. Ron went, Gryffindor, predictably, and Hermione went shortly after, Gryffindor, which surprised exactly no one, and Harry watched the hat thinking about what Hagrid had said months ago, that there wasn't a dark witch or wizard who hadn't come from Slytherin, which was maybe not the most nuanced thing anyone had ever said about a schoolhouse but had nonetheless lodged in Harry's brain. Daphne Greengrass was called before him. She walked to the stool, sat down, and the hat dropped over her blonde hair, and there was a pause of approximately 4 seconds. Harry timed it without meaning to, and then the hat called Slytherin and the green and silver table made a controlled, measured sound of approval that managed to convey satisfaction without being loud about it. She walked to the table and sat down without looking at Harry. Zabini went next, Slytherin, with barely 2 seconds of deliberation, and then names continued and then, Potter, Harry. The great hall went absolutely silent. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and the hat descended over his eyes, plunging him into darkness, and then, "Oh," said a voice in his ear that was old and dry and amused and somehow enormous, like a voice that had spent 1,000 years listening to the interior lives of 11-year-olds and had reached a comprehensive understanding of human nature from the very specific angle of their hopes and fears. "Oh, my. I haven't felt anything like that since, what?" Harry thought. "There's been a blood bonding," the hat said, and it sounded almost odd. "Ancient magic. Slytherin lineage, through the Greengrass maternal line, Seraphina Slytherin she was, married into Greengrass in 1743, most of the family forgot within 2 generations, and the bond has activated against your scar, against the Potter line, against something older still. The Peveril strain. The black line through your godfather's claim. The Slytherin title itself. Young man, you are wearing what?" Harry thought, and looked down at his hands in the darkness of the hat's interior, except it wasn't really darkness, it was the hat's perception of him, and in that perception he could see his hands and he was back in the real world. Something sharp and heavy had materialized on his right hand. 4 rings, and on his left hand, 1 more. 5 rings, all told, each one different, 1 old gold bearing a crest he recognized vaguely as the Potter arms, 1 silver green with a serpent motif, 1 black iron with a 5-pointed star, 1 in dark metal carved with 3 symbols he felt rather than understood, and 1, the one that sat heaviest and felt most present, set with a stone that was almost colorless, almost clear, that seemed to be watching the hall the way the hall was watching Harry. The sorting hat was not announcing a house. The sorting hat was completely silent. McGonagall had gone very still at her table. Dumbledore had leaned forward in his chair. The hall was silent in a different way than before it had been anticipatory, the silence of wanting to see something. Now it was the silence of people who have seen something and are trying to decide what it means. Harry looked at his hands. 5 rings. He flexed his fingers and felt the weight of them, the warmth of them, and the thing in his chest that had been woken up on the platform was fully awake now, standing up straight inside him, and it wasn't afraid. The hat said, in a voice somehow audible to the entire hall without being loud, the House of Slytherin recognizes its lord. And then, Gryffindor. The noise that followed was layered. Gryffindor table erupted. They didn't fully understand what had just happened, but they were loyal and they were his and they were cheering. The Slytherin table's applause was silence followed by very quiet, very controlled, very contained chaos, which in Slytherin terms was the equivalent of everyone screaming. The Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw tables applauded cautiously, watching the teachers. Harry took the hat off, handed it to McGonagall, who was looking at him like she was recalculating a very complex equation in real time, and walked to the Gryffindor table with 5 rings on his hands. He sat down next to Ron. "Mate," Ron said, staring at his hands. "What are those?" "I genuinely don't know," Harry said, which was almost true. The hat had told him things. He was still sorting through them. "The Sorting Hat just called you Lord of Slytherin," Hermione said from his other side, having clearly been paying close attention to the entire sequence of events. That's not supposed to be possible. The Slytherin line died out in the 15th century. All the histories say so." She paused. "Which clearly means all the histories are wrong." Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was staring at Harry with an expression that had started as contempt and was rapidly reorganizing into something Harry couldn't yet name. Beside him, Crabbe and Goyle were doing what they usually did, which was wait to be told how to feel. And further down the Slytherin table, Daphne Greengrass was looking at the rings on Harry's hands with the expression of someone who has just been told that the small thing they accidentally did has turned out to have very significant consequences, and she was in the process of deciding, quite deliberately, how she felt about that. Professor Dumbledore, at the head table, was looking at Harry with an expression of thoughtful calm that was doing a great deal of work to conceal whatever was actually happening behind those half-moon glasses. Harry picked up his fork as the food appeared. He was 11 years old. He'd spent the last 10 of those years in a cupboard or thereabouts. He had 5 rings on his hands and something ancient living in his chest and a castle that apparently knew his footsteps and a hat that had called him a lord. He was hungry. He ate. The feast ended and the prefects led them up to Gryffindor Tower, and Harry climbed staircases that moved and watched portraits that blinked and felt the castle's awareness following him like a warm current in water. He didn't comment on it. He noted it the way he'd learned to note things growing up with the Dursleys, quietly, carefully, filed away for later. Percy Weasley, who appeared to take his role as prefect as seriously as some people took minor religions, gave them the password and opened the portrait hole, and the Gryffindor common room swallowed them in firelight and red fabric. Harry sat in a chair by the fire while the other first-years went to find their dormitories. He looked at his hands. The rings caught the firelight, each one distinct, each one humming with something he could feel but not yet fully hear. He spread his fingers. 5 rings. 5 houses. He thought about the girl on the platform. Her split lip. That half-second of contact. He thought about the hat's voice in his ear, blood bonding, ancient magic, Slytherin lineage, Seraphina Slytherin, 1743, and he thought about the warmth that had hit him like a door being opened in a cold house. He hadn't asked for this. That was the honest truth of it. He hadn't asked for any of what he was. He hadn't asked to be famous or marked or the son of people who died for him or the ward of people who resented him for existing. He hadn't asked to be here, in this castle, with this strange new weight on his hands. But he was. And the rings were warm, not cold. And the castle knew his footsteps. And the old thing inside his chest was standing up straight and wasn't afraid of anything. Ron appeared at his elbow. "You're meant to come see the dormitory. Percy's having a small organized crisis about us all being in bed by 9. Right." Harry stood. "Ron." "Yeah." Harry held up his right hand. The 4 rings on it caught the fire: Potter gold, Slytherin silver green, black iron, Peveril dark metal. "Can you see these?" "Obviously I can see them, they're massive." Ron looked at them. "The Slytherin one's got a snake on it. Is it moving?" Harry looked down. The small carved serpent on the silver-green ring was, in fact, moving. Just barely. Tasting the air with a thread-fine tongue. "Yeah," Harry said. "It is." "That's either really cool or really bad," Ron said. "Probably both," Harry said, and followed him up the stairs. He woke at 3 in the morning to the feeling of the castle breathing. That was the only way to describe it, a slow, deep rhythm in the stone beneath him, like the building had lungs. He lay in his bed in the first-year dormitory listening to Ron and 3 boys he hadn't yet properly met all sleeping at various volumes, and he felt the castle exhale, and in the exhale he felt 5 distinct tugs, one from each ring, each one pointed in a different direction. South, that was Slytherin. Below, far below, under the lake. He felt it so clearly he could have drawn a map. He filed this away too. The ring on his left hand, the one that sat heaviest, the one with the almost colorless stone, pulsed once, warm and definitive, like a second heartbeat. Harry had the distinct impression that it approved of him taking mental notes. The Peveril ring. He understood enough from the hat's fragmented explanation to know that was the oldest of the 5, and that the Hallows were tied to it in ways he'd need to understand properly before he could use them. He also understood that the hat had told him that, which meant he'd been conscious during a conversation he hadn't fully tracked, which was interesting information about how his own mind worked under pressure. He thought about Daphne Greengrass. He'd been thinking about her in a background, low-level way since the platform, the way you think about a noise you heard and aren't sure was real. The blood bond, that was what the hat had called it. It wasn't romantic, or not only romantic, or maybe not romantic at all in the conventional sense. It was deeper than that. It was the kind of thing that happened when ancient bloodlines intersected and recognized each other, and Harry had the instinctive sense that it meant they were connected whether either of them intended it or not. She hadn't looked pleased about it. Harry didn't blame her. He wasn't sure how he felt about it either. But he was self-aware enough at 11, having had very little else to do during a childhood largely spent in his own head, to know the difference between a thing that was dangerous and a thing that was uncomfortable. This was uncomfortable. It was also the most alive he'd felt in his entire life, which complicated his assessment considerably. He fell back asleep with the castle breathing beneath him and the 5 rings warm on his fingers. Morning came in through the tower windows in thick horizontal bars of gold, and Harry was up before most of the dormitory because he'd spent 10 years waking early to make breakfast and the habit was wired into him at some level that a comfortable bed hadn't yet reached. He dressed, put on the rings, they'd been on his hands while he slept, and he'd half expected them to have vanished in the night, but they were as solid and present as ever, and went down to the common room. Hermione was already there with a book, which surprised him exactly 0%. She looked up. Looked at his hands. Looked back at him with an expression of focused intensity that he'd later learn was her research face. "I've been thinking," she said. "Just since this morning. Since last night. I didn't sleep especially well." She said this matter-of-factly, without complaint. The Slytherin lordship ring. The Sorting Hat said the Slytherin line died out. "But there are records, I found them in Hogwarts, a history before I fell asleep, that suggests Salazar Slytherin had a daughter. Not a son. A daughter who married into a wizarding family in the Scottish borders, and most historians assumed she had no magical children, but that's an assumption, not a documented fact." "Seraphina," Harry said. Hermione stared at him. "The hat told me some of it. Her name was Seraphina Slytherin. She married into the Greengrass family in 1743. Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Then, which means the girl, Daphne Greengrass, is a Slytherin descendant. Through her mother's maternal line, yeah. And you, when you too," Hermione glanced at his scar, then at the rings, then back at his face, and he could see her assembling the architecture of it in real time. "There's a specific type of blood magic called avunculum sanguinis. It's in a footnote in Blood and Bone, the ancient witchcraft of Britain, which I only found because it was shelved incorrectly in the junior section of my local library. It's absolutely a restricted section level text." A vinculum activates when two bloodlines with a dormant connection come into physical contact through blood. It essentially, she paused, organizing her language, it unlocks what was already there. Like a key in a lock. She had a split lip, Harry said. It touched my scar. Potter bloodline and Slytherin bloodline. Through her. And the scar, Hermione looked at his forehead with an expression that had a lot of things in it. Harry. The scar isn't just a scar, is it? I mean, I've been wondering, the way it seemed to react to you last night, to the rings, I don't know what the scar is, Harry said honestly. I know it hurts sometimes. I know it didn't hurt last night. Hermione nodded slowly. We need books, she said. Specifically, we need books that the school library probably has in the restricted section. I'm going to need a note from a teacher. It's our first morning at Hogwarts. Yes, she said, in the tone of someone who doesn't consider this a counterargument. Harry looked at his hands. The snake on the Slytherin ring was still. Hermione. What do the other rings mean? I know Potter obviously, and Slytherin. But, Black? Peveril? The Black Lordship would come from your godfather, Hermione said immediately. Sirius Black. He's the head of House Black and he's in Azkaban, which is, there are certain succession laws in old noble houses that transfer lordship rights if the sitting lord is incapacitated without renouncing. If you're the nearest eligible male heir and the bloodline recognizes you, she trailed off. And Peveril. Harry. Do you know who the Peverils were? Old family. The oldest. They're the family from the tale of the three brothers. The three brothers who supposedly met death and received the Deathly Hallows. She looked at him with an expression that was equal parts fascination and something close to alarm. If the Peveril ring has activated, Harry, the Hallows are real. Most scholars think they're real. And the Peveril line runs directly through your father's side. Harry considered this. Death's gifts, old bloodlines, a girl he'd known for approximately 8 minutes who had accidentally unlocked everything with a cut lip and a half-second of contact. What about the fifth ring, he said. He held up his left hand. The one on its own. Hermione leaned forward and looked at the almost colorless stone. Something moved in her expression he couldn't name. I don't know, she said quietly. But I want to find out. Harry felt the ring warm against his skin, as if agreeing that finding out was a reasonable priority. Library, he said. First chance we get. Absolutely, Hermione said, and opened the book she'd been reading with the focused energy of someone who has found their natural habitat. Also, do you want to find out where breakfast is? Harry did, as it happened. He was still 11 and had already had one cosmically significant event in less than 12 hours and he thought eggs and toast were probably warranted. The Great Hall at breakfast was different than the night before, loud in an ordinary way, daylight through the enchanted ceiling showing a breezy September morning, owls diving in with post and catching toast crusts on the way out. Harry ate and watched the room the way he'd always watched rooms, cataloging exits and temperatures and expressions without really thinking about it. He was aware of being watched in return. Not the general, universal watch of its Harry Potter, he'd been dealing with that since the Cauldron shop in Diagon Alley, but something more specific. He tracked it to the Slytherin table. Draco Malfoy was sitting straight-backed and eating with the performative unconcern of someone who is very concerned. His eyes came to Harry's hands every few seconds, and each time they did, something moved in his jaw. Not anger exactly. Not yet. Something more careful than anger. Beside him, not beside, further down, Daphne Greengrass was eating in the same composed, deliberate way she seemed to do everything. She wasn't looking at Harry. She was reading something propped against the juice pitcher. Her lip, Harry noticed, had healed overnight, and he had the sudden clear sense that she'd healed it herself the previous evening rather than ask a teacher or let anyone see. She turned a page. Her gray eyes were focused and unreadable. Blaise Zabini said something to her and she replied without looking up from her book, a single sentence that made him raise an eyebrow and say nothing else. Harry ate his eggs. Under the table, next to his knee, he could feel the direction of the Slytherin chambers like a compass, down, south, below the lake. And he could feel something else now. Each of the 5 rings had a slightly different quality of warmth, a slightly different note, and if he paid attention he could hear them individually the way you hear separate instruments in a piece of music. Potter, warm and steady. Black, cooler, reserved, like it was waiting. Peveril, deep and old and patient beyond measure. Slytherin, complex, ambitious but also protective, a coiled intelligence. And the 5th, the one he still didn't have a name for, was bright and clear and curious, like a question he didn't yet have the language to ask. He was going to need a great deal of library time. He was also going to need to talk to Daphne Greengrass, who had done this to him, even accidentally, and who was sitting 60 feet away reading a book and clearly thinking very hard about whether to acknowledge his existence. He decided he'd give her approximately 48 hours. After that, he was going to have questions, and he was going to ask them, and she was going to need to decide whether to answer. She didn't strike him as someone who left questions unanswered forever. She struck him as someone who answered them on her own schedule, which he could respect. He'd grown up navigating people's schedules. He was patient when he needed to be and decisive when the situation required, and he understood already, with a certainty he couldn't have explained to anyone, that what had happened on the platform was not finished. It was starting. He picked up the Pottermore ring, the Potter ring, and turned it once on his finger, and the warm gold caught the morning light through the enchanted ceiling and threw it in a small bright arc across the table, and Hermione looked up from her notes and Ron said, "What?" Without looking up from his sausages, and the castle breathed its slow breath beneath him, and Harry Potter sat in the great hall at Hogwarts on his first morning and felt, for possibly the first time in his conscious life, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The 5th ring pulsed once, warmly, as if confirming it. He folded his fingers and let it settle. Tomorrow, and all the days after, were going to be interesting. Chapter 2, The Weight of 5 Names. Dumbledore summoned him before the first class. Not a note, not a prefect with a message. McGonagall appeared at the Gryffindor table during the tail end of breakfast, materialized from somewhere behind Harry with the silent efficiency of a woman who had learned long ago that announcing your arrival gave people time to prepare excuses, and said, "Potter. The headmaster would like a word." Then she stood there, waiting, in a way that communicated clearly that now meant now. Harry put down his toast. Looked at Ron, who gave him the wide-eyed look of someone glad it wasn't them. Looked at Hermione, who mouthed "Tell me everything" with considerable urgency. He followed McGonagall through the hall, and he noticed, because he noticed everything, that the room got quieter as he left it. Just slightly. Just enough. McGonagall walked fast and talked while walking, which he appreciated. Professor Dumbledore is aware that last night was eventful. He merely wants to speak with you. This is not a disciplinary matter. I didn't do anything, Harry said. No. You didn't. A pause. Something in her voice shifted, though her face didn't change. The rings appeared on your hands during the sorting. You were sitting in a chair. As far as anyone can determine, you didn't perform any magic at all. I didn't, Harry confirmed. It just happened. McGonagall's jaw moved slightly. Yes, she said. Well. That was all she offered on the subject. Dumbledore's office was at the top of a spiral staircase behind a gargoyle that McGonagall addressed with the word sherbet lemon in a tone that suggested she found the password undignified. The office itself was circular and cluttered and extraordinary. Instruments Harry had no names for ticking and turning and emitting small puffs of silver smoke, portraits of previous headmasters dozing in their frames, and Fawkes the Phoenix sitting on his perch and watching Harry with eyes like heated copper that saw considerably more than they let on. Dumbledore was behind his desk with his fingers laced together and his half-moon glasses positioned on his nose, and he was smiling, and the smile was warm and genuine and also very carefully constructed. Harry noticed that too. He filed it under things to think about later. Harry. Please sit down. A gesture toward the chair across from his desk. Lemon drop? No thank you, Harry said, and sat. A remarkable evening, Dumbledore said, in the tone of a man who has witnessed remarkable evenings for over a century and developed a particular register for discussing them. He looked at Harry's hands, didn't reach for them, didn't ask permission to examine them, just looked, and what passed through his expression in that second before the smile resumed was complicated enough that Harry's internal cataloging system filed it under important. I wonder if I might ask you to tell me, in your own words, what happened on the platform yesterday. Harry told him about the collision. The trolley, the crack in the platform, Daphne falling against him. He described the split lip, the contact, the feeling that followed. He was matter-of-fact about it, not cold, just clear. He'd found, growing up, that matter-of-fact descriptions of things got better responses than emotional ones. People who felt you were being hysterical adjusted the thing you'd described downward. People who felt you were being calm adjusted it upward to match you. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, which Harry appreciated. He had eyes that made you want to tell him more than you'd planned, and Harry was aware of this effect and kept his account to the facts, just the facts. When he finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. And the Sorting Hat, he said. Did it speak to you? Inwardly, I mean. It explained what had happened. What the rings were. Most of it, anyway. And what did it tell you, exactly? Harry looked at him. It told me what I just told you. Blood bond. Slytherin lineage through the Greengrass maternal line. The activation against the Potter and Peverell and Black bloodlines. Dumbledore's expression didn't change. Did it explain the fifth ring? No, Harry said. It didn't get to that. A pause that was almost imperceptible. I see. Do you know what it is? Harry asked directly. Dumbledore considered him across the desk with an expression that was thoughtful and warm and very precisely measured. I have some theories, he said. Though I would prefer to confirm them before sharing them, so as not to misdirect you with speculation. He paused. What I can tell you, Harry, is that what occurred yesterday is extraordinarily rare. A vinculum sanguinis, a blood bond, has not been activated in recorded British wizarding history for over 2 centuries. The circumstances required are specific, the bloodlines involved must carry dormant resonance, and the triggering event must be unintentional, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with something that was almost surprise. Yes. Precisely. The bond cannot be deliberately made. The magic refuses it. Only genuine accident can carry the necessary, what the old texts called guileless contact. He laced his fingers together. It was an accident, wasn't it? Complete accident, Harry said. Neither of us planned it. No. I rather assumed not. Dumbledore looked at the rings again. Harry, the lordship rights these rings confer are real. They are legally binding under the Wisingamot Charter of 1692 and have not been tested in living memory because the circumstances haven't arisen, but they are real. You hold significant power. I want you to know that Hogwarts is a safe place to grow into that power, and that I am always here should you need guidance. The word guidance had a weight to it. Not threatening. Just, present. Like he was underlining it. Thank you, Harry said pleasantly. Can I ask one thing? Of course. The Peverell line. Harry held up the ring on his left hand, middle finger, the dark metal one. You're in the same order of historical context, roughly. Did you know about the Peverell connection to my family before yesterday? The smile on Dumbledore's face was so warm it would have fooled most people. Harry was not most people. He watched the half-second before the smile and what lived there. The connection between the Potter family and the Peverell line has long been a subject of historical interest, Dumbledore said. Your ancestor Ignotus Peverell is well documented. Which was true. Which also wasn't an answer to the question Harry had asked. Right, Harry said. Thank you, Professor. Anytime, Harry. Truly. My door is always open. Harry stood, thanked him again, and went to his first class. Transfiguration was McGonagall, which meant it was precise, demanding, and satisfying in the way that things with high standards and clear metrics are satisfying. She turned her desk into a pig and back again, watched their faces with the assessment of someone reading fine print, then told them theory before practice and that anyone who didn't have the textbook out in 10 seconds was starting the term on the wrong foot. Harry had his textbook out. He sat next to Ron, with Hermione on Ron's other side, and across the table from a Gryffindor girl named Lavender who kept glancing at his rings and then looking elaborately elsewhere. The rings were notable. He'd accepted that in the same way he'd accepted the scar. This is a thing on my body, it is visible to others, it generates reactions, none of this is my fault, moving on. He'd noticed over breakfast that students at every table were talking about them with varying degrees of subtlety, and that the Slytherin table in particular had spent significant energy in quiet, focused discussion that had the character of an emergency strategy meeting. He focused on the lesson. He was good at this, at narrowing focus, at setting aside everything peripheral and looking at the problem in front of him. McGonagall asked them to turn a match into a needle. Harry sat with his wand over the match, felt the Potter ring warm slightly, and thought about what he wanted. The match became a needle in 40 seconds. Not perfect, it kept the faint grain of wood along its length, but unmistakably a needle. McGonagall came to his side of the table, looked at it, looked at him, and gave him a point for Gryffindor without comment. But she touched the tip of the needle before she moved on, testing its sharpness, and her expression carried something that felt like private satisfaction, which Harry decided to take as a good sign. Hermione got hers on the second try. Ron was still working on it when the class ended. Charms after lunch. Flitwick had to stand on a pile of books to see over his desk and did so with complete dignity, which Harry respected enormously. The lesson was theory-heavy today: wand movement, the relationship between intention and execution, the history of charms as a discipline. Harry took notes and felt the Ravenclaw, wait. He paused. Felt the something from the Slytherin ring as Flitwick talked about the intellectual architecture of charm casting, the precision required, the patience. He'd assumed the pull he felt from each ring corresponded to a physical direction, and it did, but it was also more nuanced. Each ring seemed to resonate with particular kinds of things. Potter resonated with courage and instinct and direct action. Slytherin resonated with precision and strategy and patience. Peveril resonated with, he still didn't fully understand Peveril, it was deep in a way that felt like bedrock, like it was responding to something more fundamental than the specific situation. And the fifth ring, on his left hand, it resonated with understanding. He noticed it now, here, in a lesson about theory, because it was warmer than the others. Like it was happy. Like being in a room where someone was explaining how things worked was exactly where it wanted to be. He looked at it during a pause in Flitwick's lecture. The almost colorless stone caught the torchlight and threw it back with a faint prismatic edge. Like it was taking the light apart to understand it. Ravenclaw, Harry thought. Has to be. The library after dinner was Hermione's natural state and Harry's first real experience of it. The restricted section was behind a velvet rope with an alarm charm that Hermione assessed from a distance and pronounced, detectable but not prohibitive, given the right approach, which was both reassuring and slightly alarming from an 11-year-old. They found a corner table away from the few other students present, an older Ravenclaw studying alone, a pair of second-year Hufflepuffs sharing a textbook, and Hermione spread out 3 books she'd checked out legitimately and a 4th she'd found shelved in the wrong section again, which she was going to return but maybe not immediately. Blood and Bone, Harry said, reading the spine. The one I mentioned this morning. Look. She opened it to a page marked with a folded corner. Vinculum sanguinis. The blood bond, known also as the waking of lines, is one of the most ancient and uncontrollable forms of magical activation. Unlike deliberate blood magic, which requires ritual preparation and conscious intent, the vinculum is an emergent property of 2 bloodlines carrying dormant resonance. When brought into guileless contact, typically through accidental blood mixing, the dormant connection activates, manifesting the magical inheritance of both lines in the party best positioned to carry it. She looked up. That's you. Best positioned to carry it, you have the Potter and Peveril and Black lines all already present. The Greengrass Slytherin connection found somewhere to go. So I got Daphne's inheritance. Not her inheritance, the Slytherin lordship that her line was holding dormant. She likely still has the Greengrass magic, her own abilities. But the Slytherin lordship title, which requires a male heir by old custom, was waiting. In her blood. For the right contact. She paused. Harry, does she know this? I assume she's figured most of it out by now, Harry said. She seems like someone who figures things out. She's been in the library twice since classes ended, said a voice. They both turned. Blaise Zabini was standing at the end of their row of shelves, wearing his Slytherin robes with his school bag over one shoulder and an expression of carefully neutral assessment. He looked at Harry with the same measuring quality he'd had on the platform, then looked at the books on the table, then back at Harry. How long have you been standing there? Hermione asked, with the directness of someone who finds social games inefficient. Long enough to hear what you were saying about Daphne. He didn't move closer. Stayed at the end of the row, giving himself, or them, room. She's been here twice today. Different books. I know what she's been reading because she leaves a note in the back of whatever she uses, in her own cipher, for herself. He paused. She's trying to understand what happened to you. What's happening to her, Harry said. The bond runs both ways. Blaise's eyes sharpened. Does it? Has to. The hat said she's the source of the Slytherin line. I got the lordship, but the connection, the vinculum, doesn't just flow one direction. That's not how blood magic works. He held Blaise's gaze steadily. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what she's feeling. But I'd bet it's not comfortable. Blaise was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this? Because you care about her, Harry said. And because you're standing here instead of reporting this conversation to Malfoy, which means you've already made some kind of assessment and you're seeing where this leads before you decide anything. He watched Blaise process that. Also because I think you're smart enough to know that the political situation changed last night and you'd rather understand the new landscape than navigate it blind. The expression on Blaise's face was very controlled, but something in it had shifted into genuine attention. You're 11, he said. I grew up with people who didn't want me there, Harry said. You learn to read rooms fast. A beat. Blaise walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Hermione looked at Harry with an expression that said she approved but wasn't ready to say so. I'm Blaise Zabini, he said, as if they hadn't met. And you need to know that Draco spent 3 hours this evening writing a letter to his father. The letter from Lucius Malfoy didn't arrive until the following morning, but Draco's mood had been forecasting it since dawn. Harry watched him at breakfast from across the hall, the slight stiffness in his posture, the way he kept touching his wand through his robes in a habitual motion he probably wasn't aware of. Crabbe and Goyle sat either side of him like architectural features, and Pansy Parkinson kept trying to draw him into conversation, and Draco was performing attentiveness while clearly being somewhere else entirely in his head. Daphne, 3 seats down, was eating breakfast and reading again. This morning, Harry noticed, the book was pressed much closer to the table edge. She was reading and watching the room over its spine. He made a decision. He stood up before Ron had finished his first round of toast, said "back in a minute," and walked across the great hall. He was aware of the noise temperature dropping as he crossed the central space. Gryffindor table noticing. Slytherin table noticing, more controlled, but noticing. Draco going very still. Harry stopped at the Slytherin table, 2 seats to Daphne's right, which put him closer to the middle of the table and gave her the choice of turning toward him or away. He stood there, hands in his pockets, rings visible. "Greengrass," he said. She looked up from her book. The gray eyes were composed and gave nothing away. Potter. Library. After last class today. Bring your notes. He kept his voice matter-of-fact. Not a request, not a command either, just a statement of the plan. Her eyebrow moved 3 millimeters. You're assuming I have notes. You've been in the library twice. You're reading sanguinary rites and their consequences, which you've covered with a different dust jacket, but I can tell by the thickness and the binding color at the spine. He watched the micro-expression flicker. I'm not trying to make this harder than it is. I want to understand what happened. I assume you do too. She looked at him for a long moment. The kind of long moment that was doing actual work, assessing, calculating, deciding. 4 o'clock, she said, and looked back at her book. Harry nodded, turned, and walked back to the Gryffindor table. He sat down. Ron had stopped mid-toast. Did you just walk over to the Slytherin table? Yeah. And Malfoy didn't, he's staring at you. Let him stare. Harry, Hermione said quietly. Malfoy said something to the girl next to him. Harry glanced back. Pansy Parkinson was whispering to Draco. Draco's expression had settled into something specific that Harry catalogued, not anger. Not outright hostility. The deliberate, composed face of someone who is deciding on a strategy and doesn't want to show they're working. He's writing his father about the rings, Harry said. Zabini told us last night. And that concerns you? Of course, Harry said, reaching for his own toast. But being concerned is different from being scared. I'll be concerned. I won't be scared. He looked at the Slytherin ring on his hand. I hold the Slytherin lordship, Hermione. Lucius Malfoy is a Slytherin family. If he wants to play that game, he should understand who's actually holding the oldest cards. Ron made a noise. I genuinely can't tell if that's brave or mental. Usually both, I think, Hermione said, but she was almost smiling. The library at 4 was Hermione first, then Blaise, apparently invited without Harry's knowledge, but he didn't object, and then Harry, and finally Daphne at 4 minutes past, which was clearly deliberate timing and conveyed without words that she operated on her own schedule. She sat across from Harry and put 3 pages of notes on the table without preamble. They were written in a cipher, mostly, but the diagrams were clear, bloodline trees, annotated with question marks at key intersections. She'd clearly been at this for hours. The vinculum is bidirectional, she said, before anyone else could open. I've been feeling it since the platform. Whatever you're feeling, I'm feeling a version of it. What does it feel like on your end? Harry asked. She considered the question. He appreciated that she considered it rather than deflecting it. Like I've developed a new sense. Like someone added a color to the spectrum that I can almost see but not quite. She folded her hands on the table. And like something in the greengrass magic has been, lightened. As if weight I didn't know was there has been redistributed. The Slytherin lordship, Hermione said. It would have been a significant magical burden on the dormant line. Carrying a title without being able to claim it, generation after generation. Passing it forward instead of activating it. Daphne nodded once. My mother mentioned once that greengrass women experienced something she called the heaviness. She thought it was a quirk of the bloodline. She paused. It passed when I woke up this morning. For the first time in my memory. A silence. I didn't intend to take something from you, Harry said. You didn't take it. It moved. She said this precisely, as if correcting a small factual error, not making an emotional point. And for the record, I don't resent what happened. I'm trying to understand it. There's a difference. There is, Harry agreed. Blaise, who had been sitting slightly apart with his own notes, said, there's something else. Show him. Daphne looked at Blaise with an expression that mixed affection and irritation in equal measure, the specific cocktail of people who have known each other long enough to skip straight to exasperation. Then she reached into her bag and placed a single leaf of parchment on the table. It had been sealed with silver wax and opened, the seal was broken. Harry looked at it. "What is this?" "My mother sent it this morning," Daphne said. "She was apparently contacted last night. By Dumbledore." Harry went still. He wrote to her, explaining what occurred, assuring her that the bond posed no threat to Daphne's well-being, offering to arrange a meeting. She paused. There was a second message, separate, from someone else. My mother didn't say who. But she underlined one sentence in her letter to me. Daphne pointed to the line in the middle of the page. "Be careful, darling. Old names have old enemies." Harry read it twice. Then looked at Daphne. "Do you know who the second message was from?" "No. But my mother is not easily alarmed." Daphne's composure was absolute. She was alarmed. Under the table, Harry's rings had shifted in temperature. Potter and Slytherin both running warmer. The Peveril ring, cool and patient. The black ring, very slightly cooler still, the way metal cools when night comes, like it recognized the phrasing, the subtext. Old names. Old enemies. "Lucius Malfoy is writing his father," Blaise said, looking at Harry. "I heard him dictating to his owl this morning. He used the phrase problematic development." "He doesn't have a legal angle," Hermione said immediately. "The noble house lordship rights are binding. There's no mechanism to challenge a vinculum-activated lordship under Wisengamot charter." I checked. "It's absolutely unambiguous, once the rings manifest, the claim is recognized." "Legality isn't his first tool," Daphne said, with the flatness of someone who has grown up around people for whom legality was merely one of several options. "Malfoy will look for leverage that isn't legal. Reputation. Relationships. Information. Then let him look," Harry said. They all looked at him. "I'm the lord of 5 noble houses," he said, and it wasn't boastful, it was exactly as matter-of-fact as anything else he'd said today. "I'm also 11, which I'll admit is a logistical disadvantage. But the rings don't care. The magic doesn't care. And I didn't spend 10 years being told I was nothing to turn around and be impressed by Lucius Malfoy's letterwriting." He looked at Daphne. "You said old names have old enemies. So we find out what enemies and we find out why, and we find out before they find out what they're actually dealing with." A pause. "That's very Slytherin," Daphne said, and something in her voice wasn't quite the same as it had been. Just slightly warmer. Almost imperceptible. "I've got the ring for it," Harry said. Blaise made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "All right," he said. "What do you need to know?" They worked for 2 hours. Hermione and Daphne found a rhythm that was slightly competitive but fundamentally collaborative, 2 people who were both used to being the smartest person reading, adjusting quickly to a shared standard. Blaise contributed from memory, which was extensive, particularly in the area of pureblood politics and family relationships, the kind of thing that wasn't in books but was passed down at dinner tables. Harry listened to all of it and assembled the picture. The 5 houses he now held were, Potter, Slytherin, Black, Peveril, and, Hermione had confirmed it, cross-referencing Lineage of the Sacred, the Deathly Families and a genealogical addendum in a history of magical Britain, Ravenclaw. The 5th ring. The almost colorless stone. The line had passed through his father's side through a maternal connection 5 generations back, a woman named Celestine who had married a Potter in the 1780s and carried the Ravenclaw title dormant, again, waiting. Hermione had gone very quiet when she confirmed this. Then she'd said, "Harry. Slytherin and Ravenclaw. 2 founders' houses. 3, if you count, Gryffindor." She said it first. Her eyes went briefly enormous. "The Potter line, Harry, the Potter line originated, Godric Gryffindor," Harry said, because the Peveril ring had been warming in a specific way since the hat put him in Gryffindor and he'd been doing the math. The Potters are descended from the Gryffindor line. Not directly, there's no lordship ring for Gryffindor because the line was never a noble house in the technical sense. Godric Gryffindor never formally established title. But the blood is there. How long have you known this? Hermione said. Since this morning. I've been sitting with it. Blaise was looking at him with an expression that had moved through several phases and arrived somewhere close to reluctant respect. You have the blood of 3 founders. 4, through the Slytherin connection, Daphne said quietly. The Greengrass Slytherin line is maternal Slytherin. And the bond transferred the Slytherin magic through contact with Gryffindor blood. She paused. Salazar and Godric. Blended. In you. The table was quiet. Right, Harry said. So. That's either a very good thing or the most complicated possible thing. Both, Blaise said. Yeah, Harry agreed. That keeps happening. He found Draco waiting for him outside the library. Not waiting as in lurking, Draco Malfoy would never lurk, he'd made clear aesthetic choices about his self-presentation and lurking wasn't among them. He was standing with his arms folded and Crabbe and Goyle marginally behind him, which Harry noted was a habit Draco had, using their size the way some people used furniture, as positioning. Potter, Draco said. A word. Harry stopped. Looked at Crabbe and Goyle, then back at Draco. What kind of word? A private one. There are 3 of you, Harry pointed out. Draco glanced at Crabbe and Goyle. Wait here. They moved to the wall without question. Draco stepped forward. He was doing the aristocratic authority thing well, spine straight, chin level, the practiced ease of someone who'd been taught from infancy that he was important. Harry gave him credit for the technique. Those rings, Draco said, his voice low and controlled. What about them? The Slytherin lordship. You understand what you're claiming. I'm not claiming it, Harry said. It's claimed. Already done. Draco's jaw was doing the thing again. The Slytherin house lordship has been it's been connected to certain families for a long time. Historically. In terms of, is your father expecting to inherit it somehow? The direct question landed and Draco's composure flickered. That's not, because the lordship requires a blood connection to the Slytherin line, and the Malfoy family connection to Slytherin is through marriage 3 generations back, which doesn't qualify under the charter. Harry held Draco's gaze pleasantly. I did some reading today. Did you know there's a Wisengamot ruling from 1823 that specifically establishes that noble house lordship through dormant bloodline supersedes all prior informal custodianship claims? Because there is. It's very clear. Draco stared at him. You're 11, he said again, the same thing Blaise had said, but where Blaise had said it with something approaching respect, Draco said it with something approaching injury. Like Harry being 11 was a violation of something. I've been told, Harry said. You don't understand what you're walking into, Draco said, and the control in his voice cracked slightly. Just slightly. Your father is a Slytherin family head, Harry said. And I hold the Slytherin lordship. If he wants to have a conversation about that, I'm available. But I'm not available for threats wrapped in warnings. If he has something to say to me, he should say it. He looked at Draco calmly. So should you. The corridor was very quiet. Draco's eyes moved to the rings. Then back to Harry's face. And something passed through his expression that was more honest than anything Harry had seen from him yet, not anger, not contempt, something raw. He looked, for a moment, like a boy who had been given very specific instructions about how the world worked and had just encountered data that contradicted them at a fundamental level, and didn't yet know whether to reject the data or the instructions. Then the mask came back. Smoother than before, because he knew it had slipped. We'll speak again, he said, with the finality of a door closing. I'm sure, Harry said. Draco collected Crabbe and Goyle and walked away without looking back. Harry watched him go, and the Slytherin ring pulsed once, thoughtful and measuring, and Harry had the distinct sense that the ring understood Draco Malfoy quite well, understood the architecture of his thinking, recognized the ambition and the fear wrapped around each other, and that this understanding was information worth having. He went back to Gryffindor Tower. He had homework to do, for the first time in his life, at a school he was actually allowed to attend. He was going to do it properly. He was going to understand everything there was to understand, one piece at a time, and he was going to stay ahead of whatever Lucius Malfoy was planning, and he was going to do it without hiding and without apologizing for the weight of 5 rings on his hands. He took the stairs 2 at a time, and the castle breathed warm around him, and somewhere below in the dungeons he could feel the particular resonance of the Slytherin chamber like a compass needle, and above him somewhere the light from the astronomy tower was catching the late evening sky and turning it gold, and all of it, was his by right and by blood and by an accident on a platform that had felt, from the very first half-second, like something that had always been going to happen. He sat at the common room table with his potions essay and a quill he hadn't used before and put his 5-ringed hands on the parchment. Hermione slid into the seat across from him and opened her own parchment without speaking, which was the closest thing to companionable silence he'd encountered since arriving. Ron dropped into the chair beside him, stole one of his quills, and said, "How much do you actually know about potions?" In the tone of someone hoping the answer was not much, because misery likes company. "Less than I need to," Harry said honestly. "Brilliant," said Ron, and uncapped the stolen quill, and the 3 of them bent over their work in the firelit tower, and outside the windows Hogwarts spread dark and enormous and full of secrets, and Harry Potter sat in the middle of all of it and felt, for the second time in 2 days, that this was exactly where he was supposed to be. The 5th ring, Ravenclaw, brilliant and curious and hungry for understanding, was warmest of all. Chapter 3, The Language of Old Blood. The snake appeared on a Tuesday. Harry had been in herbology when he first heard it, not heard, exactly, felt was closer, a pressure at the edge of perception like a voice speaking in a room next door. He'd been repotting a fanged geranium that was making its objections known through aggressive stem whipping, and the feeling had passed before he could locate it, and he'd filed it and moved on. It came back in the corridor outside Charms. A grass snake had somehow gotten into the castle, no one knew how, and no one seemed particularly concerned because Hogwarts was Hogwarts and occasionally things simply appeared, and it was pressed against the baseboard in the corridor, very still, clearly lost and very cold and deeply annoyed about both. Most students stepped around it with varying degrees of caution. One second-year Hufflepuff made a noise and flattened herself against the opposite wall. Harry stopped. The snake looked at him. And then, very clearly, in a voice that was simultaneously the absence of sound and the most distinct communication Harry had ever received, "I am cold. Where is the warmth?" Harry crouched down, level with the baseboard. "The warmth is probably the greenhouses," he said. "On the south end of the grounds." The snake's tongue tasted the air. "You speak." "Apparently," Harry said. "They don't speak." The snake moved its flat head toward the retreating students. "They make noise but it isn't speaking." "I know. I'm not sure why I can, exactly. I'm working on it." He looked at the snake. It was perhaps 2 feet long, dark green, with very direct eyes. "Are you hurt?" "Cold." "Not hurt. Someone will probably move you outside. Or to the greenhouses. Warmer there." The snake considered this with the grave patience of reptiles. "I will go to the warmth." "Good plan." He stood up. The corridor was completely silent. Harry looked up from the baseboard and discovered that approximately 15 students had stopped walking and were now staring at him with expressions distributed across the spectrum from confused to genuinely alarmed. Ron was standing 2 feet away with his jaw slightly parted. Hermione was behind him with her notebook, which she had not opened because she had apparently been transcribing the conversation. And at the far end of the corridor, very still, was Professor Snape. Severus Snape had the quality, Harry had noticed over the week since classes began, of being able to generate silence simply by being present. Not because anyone was afraid of him, although some were, but because he operated at a frequency that demanded stillness the way a very precise instrument demands a steady hand. He was sharp-featured and dark-robed and deeply unimpressed by essentially everything, and he had looked at Harry in every class so far with an expression that contained several years' worth of complicated history that Harry didn't yet have access to. He was looking at him now with an expression Harry hadn't seen on his face before. Not complicated. Not contemptuous. Not the careful blankness he deployed when masking emotion. Something stripped back and attentive, the expression of someone who has seen something they did not expect and whose mind has immediately gone to what does this mean. His eyes dropped to Harry's hands. The Slytherin ring. He looked at the ring for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Potter. My office. After dinner." And walked away. Harry looked at Ron. Were you just, Harry, were you talking to that snake? Apparently. It sounded like, I couldn't understand any of it. It sounded like, I could understand it perfectly, Harry said, watching the grass snake make its deliberate way toward the south-facing window at the end of the corridor. Both directions. Parseltongue, Hermione said, in the specific voice she used when something had just confirmed a research hypothesis. Oh, that makes, she flipped the notebook open and started writing. Salazar Slytherin was a Parselmouth. It's in Serpents and Their Speakers, A History of Parseltongue Magic, 3rd shelf, restricted section, that the ability runs in bloodlines connected to Slytherin, but the Slytherin line was believed extinct, so there's been no documented Parselmouth in Britain since the early 19th century, but if the Slytherin blood transferred to you through the vinculum, then the Parseltongue came with it, Harry finished. Not just Parseltongue. Hermione turned her notebook to show him what she'd been writing. She'd been building a theory for 3 days, and the notes were organized with the focused coherence of someone who had been waiting for confirmation to present it. The Slytherin lordship doesn't just carry a title. It carries the magical qualities of the line, the abilities that made Slytherin what it was. Parseltongue, obviously. But also what the old texts call serpens cognitio, snake cognition, a sensitivity to intent and deception in others. Slytherin himself could allegedly read manipulation the way others read facial expressions. She looked at him. Have you been feeling anything like that? Harry thought about Dumbledore's office. The warmth of the smile and the different thing underneath it. Draco's mask slipping and the rawer thing behind it. The way he'd read Blaise in the library corridor with a confidence he hadn't questioned until now. Yes, he said. Since the first night. Hermione wrote this down at considerable speed. Ron was looking between them with the expression of a spectator watching a very fast tennis match. This is genuinely frightening, Ron said pleasantly. Just as a side note. It's information, Harry said, and crouched down one more time. The grass snake was at the window now, pressing its head against the glass, feeling for the sun through the stone. That way is the warmth, Harry told it in the sliding scale language that wasn't quite words. Someone will open the window for you. I know, the snake said, with the implacable confidence of something that has been waiting for things without anxiety for its entire evolutionary history. I was not worried. Harry stood up, smiled at nothing in particular, and went to Charms. Snape's office was in the dungeons, and reaching it required descending 2 staircases and navigating a corridor where the torches burned green instead of orange, which either meant something specific or was purely aesthetic, Harry hadn't determined which yet. The door was heavy oak and opened before he knocked, which he found both impressive and mildly theatrical. Inside, the office was exactly what you'd expect from the office of a man who had chosen dungeons voluntarily, dim, orderly in the way that suggested the owner knew the position of every item without needing to look, shelves of potions ingredients in glass jars that he studied in his peripheral vision while entering. It smelled of brine and something sweet he couldn't identify and something else beneath both of those, older, something that was the dungeon itself speaking. Snape was behind his desk. He did not offer a chair, so Harry took one without being invited, because standing while someone sat struck him as an imbalance he wasn't interested in accepting. Snape's eyes moved to the chair, then back to Harry's face. A fractional reaction, almost surprise, then something more considering. I understand from your teachers that your first week has been academically adequate, Snape said, with the delivery of a man for whom adequate was a considered position and not a neutral one. This meeting is not about your academics. I assumed, Harry said. What you did in the corridor today, Snape stopped. Started again, differently. How long have you been able to speak Parseltongue? Since the sorting. Or, since the platform. I'm not sure which event actually triggered it. The sorting activated the rings, but the blood bond on the platform was when the vinculum, I know what a vinculum is, Snape said, sharply, and then caught himself. He looked at Harry with an expression that was working very hard. Harry could feel it, the Slytherin ring warm on his finger, the serpens cognitio quality that Hermione had named sitting behind his eyes, reading the layers. Snape was angry about something, but the anger was old and it was pointed somewhere that wasn't the room. And beneath the anger there was something he wasn't going to name, something Harry could feel the shape of without being able to see it clearly. Grief, maybe. Recognition. He was looking at Harry the way you look at something that reminds you of something else. Your mother, Snape said, after a silence, and then stopped. What about her? Nothing. I knew your parents. That's not relevant to this discussion. He gathered himself visibly, the way a man rearranges furniture to make the room look intentional. The Slytherin ring. Show me. Harry held out his right hand. Snape leaned forward and looked at the ring without touching it. The carved serpent was awake today, moving in slow loops around the band, which happened whenever Harry was in a situation that required more attention than usual. Its eyes, Harry had noticed, were infinitesimally small and extremely alert. Snape sat back. The Slytherin house lordship markers are correct, he said. The serpent's orientation, the metal composition, the ward channel at the inner band. He said this precisely, factually, and Harry had the sense that he was confirming something he'd needed to confirm. You knew what to look for, Harry said. I've read the histories. A pause. Thoroughly. Because you hoped to find the Slytherin line. Snape went very still. The stillness of someone who hadn't expected to be read. Not for yourself, Harry clarified. You wouldn't want the lordship. You're not interested in that kind of power, not the formal kind. But you were looking because, you're the head of Slytherin house and the line being extinct was a problem for something. For the house. For the students. He watched Snape's face. The serpens cognitio was running hot and clear. You wanted the lordship found because certain protections the Slytherin lordship could provide have been dormant with the line. Legal protections, maybe. Or something more direct. The silence that followed had a different quality than the one before it. You're 11 years old, Snape said, very quietly, and unlike when Draco or Blaise had said it, from Snape it wasn't about surprise. It was about something else he wasn't going to name in this room, in this conversation. So people keep saying, Harry said. Snape looked at him for a long moment. Then, the Chamber of Secrets. Harry waited. There are passages in this castle that respond to Slytherin blood and open to Parseltongue, Snape said. Most have not been accessed since the 16th century. The Chamber of Secrets is the most significant, but there are others, lesser chambers, passages, vaults. He folded his hands on the desk. The chamber itself is a point of considerable historical sensitivity and I am not suggesting you go looking for it. I am telling you it exists and that you now have the keys to it, in a manner of speaking, so that you are not surprised if the castle begins, responding to you in new ways. It's been responding to me since I arrived, Harry said. Something in Snape's expression moved. Yes. I expected it might. He looked at the rings again. All 5. I heard the hat last night. The implications are significant. You've been thinking about it since Tuesday. I've been thinking about it since the sorting. What conclusions have you reached? Snape looked at him with the expression of a man who has not been asked to share his conclusions by a student before and is assessing how he feels about it. "Several," he said, finally. "Most of which I will share when they are more developed. One of which I will share now." He met Harry's eyes directly. "Albus Dumbledore is not your enemy. But he manages people. He manages them carefully, and with considerable affection, and with the absolute conviction that he knows what is best for them. Given what you are carrying, a glance at the rings, you need to be aware of that tendency before it shapes decisions that should be yours to make." Harry held his gaze. "Why are you telling me this?" Snape was quiet for a moment that felt long. "Because I knew your mother," he said, finally, in a voice that was perfectly flat and gave nothing away and gave everything away. "And because the Slytherin house, my students, are going to need a lord who actually understands what the title means." He stood. "That will be all, Potter." Harry stood. Walked to the door. Stopped with his hand on it. "Professor." He didn't turn around. "The thing you hope the lordship can provide. The protection. Is it something I can do now, legally, or is there something that needs to happen first?" A pause. "The Wizengamot," Snape said behind him, precise and careful. "A lord-claiming seat requires formal presentation. You won't be of age for that. But, certain emergency motions can be lodged by a recognized lord regardless of age. Family protection clauses, specifically. If you want to understand what those cover, I would recommend the fourth shelf in the library's restricted section, third volume, blue spine." "Thank you," Harry said, and meant it. He left. The castle did something different that night. Harry was heading back to the tower from Snape's office, moving through the dungeon corridor with the green torches, and the wall to his left, ordinary stone, nothing notable, pulsed. Not a vibration. A pulse. Like a heartbeat. Like someone on the other side knocking once. He stopped. Put his hand flat on the stone. The Slytherin ring lit up. Not visibly, not in a way anyone watching would have caught, but against his palm he felt it radiate something, and the stone under his hand went from cold to warm in the span of 2 seconds, and then warm to alive, and the wall opened. Not the whole wall. A seam appeared, floor to ceiling, perfectly vertical, and the section of wall to the left of his hand swung inward on some mechanism that had been waiting. He felt this with the same clarity he felt the direction of the Slytherin chambers, for someone who carried the right blood for a very long time. Beyond was a passage. Narrow, low-ceilinged, lit by the same green torches but older ones, the iron brackets corroded to black, the flames smaller and steadier than the ones in the main corridor. The stone was different too, older, the kind of ancient that predated the rest of the castle by enough to feel like a different building wearing the same exterior. Harry looked back at the empty corridor. Then into the passage. He went in. The passage turned once, twice, descended 4 steps that weren't quite even, and opened into a chamber that was maybe the size of the Gryffindor common room but felt larger because of its ceiling, vaulted, carved with serpents that were not decorative but structural, winding through the stone like load-bearing elements, holding up the arch. In the center of the room, a table. Not elegant, functional, old oak, carved with the same serpent motifs, the surface covered with something that wasn't dust exactly but was what happened to surfaces that hadn't been touched in a very long time. 3 chairs around it. And on the table, a flat-topped box, stone, sealed with a mechanism that was a snake biting its own tail. A vault, Harry thought. Or an archive. He crossed to the table. Stood over the box. The Slytherin ring hummed against his finger, a warm constant note like a tuning fork, and he thought, very deliberately, in the sliding language of Parseltongue, open. The serpent biting its tail released. The box opened. Inside, parchment, many pieces, rolled and sealed. A glass vial of something silver that moved like mercury but slower, with more intention. A ring, another ring, different from his, smaller, set with a deep green stone, with a note tucked under it that he unrolled carefully. The handwriting was archaic, the ink brown with age. But it was legible. For the one who opens this by right of blood and tongue, these are the memories of Salazar Slytherin, recorded in the old way, kept against the time when the line is whole again. The vault recognizes no thief. It opened because you are true. Use what is here carefully. We built this school to last, not to be fought over. SS. Harry stood in the chamber under the serpent vault and held the note. We built this school to last. Not Slytherin the monster, not Slytherin the bigot of the children's stories, Slytherin the founder, one of 4 people who had built something they intended to last. Who had been, presumably, something other than a pure symbol of malevolence before centuries of retelling simplified him into one. Harry set the note back in the box. He didn't take the memories yet, he wasn't ready for whatever process accessed them and he wasn't going to rush it. He noted the vial, the ring, the parchments. He closed the box. The serpent sealed. He stood in the chamber for a moment more, listening. The castle breathed. Down here it was slower, deeper. Ancient. And the petrol ring, which had been cool and patient all evening, warmed slowly against his left hand, and he had the sudden strong impression, not a thought, not words, just an impression, the way you understand something in a dream, that the petrol ring and this chamber had a relationship, that Death's gifts and Slytherin's legacy had touched each other somewhere in the long centuries, and that understanding the connection was going to matter. He filed it. He left the chamber. The wall sealed behind him as if it had never opened. He found Daphne in the library the next morning before breakfast, which meant she'd gotten there before 7, which meant she hadn't been sleeping especially well. He didn't say this. He sat down across from her and said, I found a chamber in the dungeon last night. And watched her face. The reaction was subtle. Her eyes came up from her book with a specific quality of attention, not surprise, but the focused stillness of someone receiving information they've been expecting without knowing they were expecting it. What kind of chamber? Slytherin. Precastle, I think, or earliest build. With a vault. He described it briefly, the box, the note, the memories in the vial. He watched her while he talked and let the serpent's cognitio run, reading the layers. She was processing fast. There was something in her face that was almost proprietary, the faint trace of someone hearing about a thing that had always been theirs, in some sense, even if it hadn't. The memories, she said. Salazar Slytherin's actual memories. Apparently. You didn't access them yet. No. I wanted to think about it first. He paused. And I wanted to tell you about it before I did anything. She looked at him. The gray eyes did their careful assessment. Why? Because the Slytherin blood that activated the vinculum was yours. The lordship came from your line. Whatever's in those memories, I don't think I should be accessing them without you knowing they exist. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It had texture to it. She started, and then stopped. Started differently. Most people in your position would simply use whatever advantage they'd found. Without consulting anyone, least of all a Slytherin. Most people in my position haven't been thinking about this specific thing for a week, Harry said. Also, I don't think you're most people. Daphne set her book down flat. Looked at him with the careful directness she used when she was being honest rather than strategic. The bond, she said. Can you feel it right now? He could. The thing in his chest that had been woken on the platform, there was a directional quality to it when she was nearby, like a compass that had found something to point at. Yes. I can feel it too. She seemed to search for the word, which was unusual for someone who always had words exactly where she needed them. Louder. Since last night. Since whatever happened in the chamber. The vault opening. The Slytherin magic engaging properly. He thought about it. It makes sense. The bond connects you to the Slytherin line, and the line got more active. So the bond gets more active. Does it concern you? Does it concern you? Her lips pressed together very slightly. I asked first. I'm aware of it, Harry said. I'm not worried about it. I trust it, which I know sounds strange, she said. But I understand what you mean. It doesn't feel malevolent. She picked up her book. I want to see the chamber. Tonight, Harry said. I'll come to the Slytherin entrance after dinner. You know where the Slytherin entrance is? The compass in my chest points there constantly, Harry said pleasantly. South. Below the lake. Something moved across her face that might have been the beginning of a smile if it had gone slightly further. Fine, she said. After dinner. And, Potter. Harry. A pause. Harry. Testing the word. Don't tell anyone else about the memories yet. Not until we know what's in them. I was going to tell Hermione. Obviously Granger. She's essentially a research instrument at this point. I mean anyone else. He considered this. Agreed. She opened her book again, with the decisive snap of someone who has concluded a negotiation satisfactorily. Harry got up, then stopped. Daphne. The bond. When I'm closer to you, it gets louder. Does the same thing happen to you? The pause before she answered was precisely calibrated and told him everything. Yes, she said, without looking up. It does. Harry nodded and went to breakfast. Hermione took the news about the chamber with the focus of a surgeon receiving information about a newly discovered organ, clinical, intent, immediately working through implications. She wrote 4 pages of notes in charms, which was impressive given that they were also supposed to be learning basic charm theory, and then at lunch she presented her conclusions in bullet-pointed verbal form, which Harry had already learned was her primary mode of excited communication. The vault is almost certainly a memoria hereditas, she said, eating her soup without looking at it. An ancestral memory store. Rare even in the medieval period. The process for creating one involves, she glanced at Ron, who was halfway through his second roll, it involves extracting actual memories and crystallizing them, essentially. What you saw in the vial is almost certainly memories in liquid form. Like a pensieve but portable and sealed to a specific bloodline. So I'd pour it into a pensieve, Harry said. If you can access a pensieve, yes. Dumbledore has one, it's fairly well known that headmasters are given access to one in the office. But you can't exactly ask him, without him knowing about the chamber and the vault, Harry finished. No. There's another way, Hermione said. A memoria hereditas can sometimes be accessed by the bloodline heir directly, without a pensieve, through the lordship bond. I found a reference in Blood and Bone, here, she'd brought it, of course, in her bag, and flipped to a flagged page. It's described as direct memory inheritance. The lordship bond acts as the pensieve, essentially. You'd need to hold the vial and consciously open the channel through the ring. Is it safe? For someone with the right bloodline, yes. For anyone else, she made a face. The vault opens with Parseltongue and blood recognition, so presumably anyone else couldn't access the vial anyway. Ron had been following this with the expression of someone watching a foreign film without subtitles, understanding about 1 word in 5 but gamely staying engaged. What happens if you just drink it? They both looked at him. I'm asking for practical reasons, Ron said. Is that a thing? Is that an option? No, Hermione said firmly. Right. Just checking. The walk to the Slytherin entrance that evening took Harry through 3 corridors and 1 moving staircase that tried to redirect him and then apparently thought better of it and moved back into position, which he was fairly sure had never happened to anyone before and which he chose not to examine too closely. The Slytherin common room entrance was a bare section of dungeon wall that opened when he was still 5 feet from it, which he suspected wasn't how it was meant to work and was the castle's way of making a point. Daphne was waiting in the corridor outside, Blaise a step behind her. I invited myself, Blaise said, before Harry could process his presence. Daphne said no. I'm here anyway. He's not a risk, Daphne said, in the tone of someone who has already run the calculation. And I'd rather not go into an unknown Slytherin chamber with only a Gryffindor for backup. I'll take that as a compliment, Harry said. It wasn't one. But she was almost smiling again, that expression that went 2/3 of the way and stopped. Lead. He brought them to the spot in the dungeon corridor. The green torches. The wall. He put his hand on the stone. The pulse, the warmth, the seam, and the wall swung open. Blaze made a sound. Just one. Short and controlled. How long has that been there? Since the castle was built, I think, Harry said, and led them in. The chamber in torchlight with 3 people in it felt different than alone, smaller, less vast, more real. Daphne walked the perimeter slowly, touching nothing, looking at everything. Her fingers ghosted along the serpent carvings in the wall and he could feel it, through the bond, through the shared Slytherin thread, that the carvings were answering her touch in some way, not opening or activating, just recognizing. She came to stand before the central table. The box. She looked at it without touching it. May I? She said, looking at Harry. He nodded. She placed both hands on the box. And the serpent biting its tail moved, not fully releasing, but shifting, the head lifting slightly and orienting toward her hands, before settling again. An acknowledgement rather than an opening. Daphne took her hands back. It knows me, she said quietly. Of course, Harry said. Your blood made it possible for me to open it at all. She was quiet for a moment. Blaze came to stand beside her, looking at the box with the focused expression he used when he was doing serious thinking. What's in it? Harry told them about the note, the vial, the ring, the parchments. When he mentioned the note, we built this school to last, not to be fought over, Daphne's eyes changed. He couldn't have said how, exactly. Something behind them shifted in a way that was more personal than the rest of her responses had been. He wasn't what they say, she said. Not a question. I don't know yet, Harry said. But the note doesn't sound like a monster. People are never only one thing, Blaze said, with the matter-of-fact air of someone who had grown up around enough complicated people to be sure of this. Whatever he was, we need to understand what he knew. If those memories include anything about the Chamber of Secrets, or the other passages Snape mentioned, you spoke to Snape. Daphne's attention snapped to Harry. He summoned me. He knows about the Parseltongue and the lordship. Harry thought about how to describe Snape accurately. He's on our side, I think. In the specific sense that he has goals that overlap with ours, and he's useful and honest in his way, even when he's also being difficult. That's a generous reading of Snape, Blaze said. It's an accurate one, Daphne said quietly, surprising both of them. He's protected students in Slytherin from things they didn't know to be protected from. He's not warm about it. But he does it. She paused. He was looking at you in potions today. During the lesson. Checking my technique? No. Looking at your face. She said it without particular inflection. Just information. The way people look at something they used to know. Harry thought about Snape's voice when he'd said I knew your mother. The perfect flatness of it. Yeah, he said. They stood in the old chamber for a while, the 3 of them, and the serpent carvings in the ceiling moved slowly overhead, and the torches burned green and steady. Harry felt the bond between him and Daphne warm and clear and present, and the lordship rights of 5 houses settled in his hands like instruments he was just beginning to learn to play, and the Peveril ring pulsed once, cool and deep and ancient, as if reminding him that the deepest things took the longest to understand. Next week, Daphne said finally. The memories. We access them next week. I want to find out if there's a pensive alternative first, and I want Granger to have read everything she can find about the Memoria Hereditas process. She looked at Harry. Agreed? Agreed, Harry said. Blaze looked between them. You two are going to be genuinely terrifying in 5 years, he said. Neither of them disagreed. It was the next morning that Draco made his move. It wasn't subtle, which was unusual, and Harry realized later that the lack of subtlety was the point. This wasn't Draco acting, this was Draco being watched and performing for someone he expected to report back to his father. The Great Hall, breakfast, most students present. Draco stood at the midpoint between the Slytherin and Gryffindor tables, which was a spot that put him in earshot of both and visible from the teacher's table, and said, clearly, loudly enough to carry, Potter. A question about your rings. Harry set down his fork. Looked at him. I've been looking into the Slytherin lordship claim, Draco said. The historical basis. And I find a discrepancy. He had clearly prepared this, which meant his father had probably helped him prepare it, which meant the audience wasn't the students. It was McGonagall, who had gone still at the teacher's table, and possibly Dumbledore's portrait, which sometimes relayed information to the living headmaster. The Greengrass family's connection to the Slytherin line runs through the maternal side. Specifically the maternal grandmother. There's a question of whether maternal descent is sufficient for a bloodline lordship activation. Most noble house charters require patrilineal succession. The hall was quiet in the way it had been during the sorting, the specific quiet of a room that knows it's watching something. Harry looked at Draco for a moment. Then he picked his fork back up. Wisengamot ruling of 1823, he said, and ate a piece of bacon. The Harriet Pemberton case. A maternal line was found sufficient for lordship activation under vinculum conditions because the vinculum itself is the activation mechanism, not the succession chart. The charter's gender requirements apply to deliberate successions. The vinculum doesn't ask for permission. He looked up at Draco. Your father probably knows this. He presumably sent you anyway because he wants to see how I respond to challenges, not because he actually thinks the challenge will work. The silence was absolute. Draco's composure was intact. But his eyes had done the thing again, that fractional, honest thing, where the prepared response met an unexpected reality and the gap between them showed for half a second. You've been researching, he said. Constantly, Harry agreed pleasantly. Was there anything else? A pause. Draco looked at him with an expression that had moved past the rehearsed challenge into something more personal, and Harry could feel the serpens cognitio running beneath everything, reading Draco the way he'd been reading everyone, layer by layer, and what he found in Draco, beneath the performance and the training and the enormous weight of being Lucius Malfoy's son, was a boy who was intelligent and who was beginning to understand that he had been positioned in a war he wasn't sure he'd have chosen. No, Draco said. That's all. He went back to the Slytherin table. McGonagall looked at Harry from the teacher's table, and her expression was precisely the expression she had used when he turned the match into a needle, private satisfaction, tightly controlled. Hermione, beside Harry, was writing notes with the speed of someone who didn't want to lose a single word. Ron had stopped eating entirely and was staring at the space where Draco had been standing. How did you know all that? He said. Hermione found the ruling, Harry said. I just remembered it. Ron looked at Hermione. Are you two actually going to be this terrifying for the next 7 years? Minimum, Hermione said, without looking up from her notes. Harry ate his breakfast, and the Slytherin ring moved its small carved serpent in a slow, satisfied loop, and down in the dungeon the ancient chamber held its vault of old memories, patient and waiting, and the castle breathed its long breath around all of it, and Harry Potter sat in the middle of his first year at Hogwarts and understood, with the specific, grounded clarity of someone who has been underestimated their whole life and has stopped being bothered by it, that this was only the beginning. The bond to Daphne was warm and steady as a held note. The Peveril ring was cool and waiting. The Slytherin line was awake. And Lucius Malfoy, somewhere beyond the castle walls, was writing letters. Harry was looking forward to the reply. Chapter 4, Lords Don't Ask Permission. Lucius Malfoy arrived on a Thursday. Harry knew before anyone announced it. The castle told him, not in words, not even in the specific pulse language it used for passages and chambers, but in the way the air pressure changed slightly in the corridors nearest the main entrance, the way the stones carried a particular vibration that had nothing to do with the building's own breathing. Something that didn't belong had entered the wards. He was in transfiguration when it happened. He felt it and noted it and kept his eyes on the partially transfigured inkwell in front of him. He was working on turning it into a small animal, a mouse, the next step beyond the match-to-needle exercise, and the inkwell became a mouse with neat ears and an irritated expression, and McGonagall made a sound of approbation and moved on, and Harry tucked the knowledge of Lucius Malfoy's arrival somewhere accessible and waited. The news reached the student body through the usual channels, which is to say, Percy Weasley told Ron with the gravity of a man sharing state secrets, and Ron told Harry at lunch, and by afternoon everyone knew that a member of the Board of Governors had arrived to conduct a routine review, which was the official version, and that Lucius Malfoy was here specifically to look at Harry Potter's rings, which was the real version, and both versions were circulating simultaneously. Board of Governors visit, Hermione said, sitting beside Harry with her lunch untouched and her research expression engaged. He has legitimate authority under the Hogwarts Charter to request access to certain things. Records, primarily. Student classifications. Historical precedents regarding unusual magical events. She paused. Like 5 lordship rings appearing on a first year. So this is official, Harry said. It's dressed as official. She looked at him carefully. Harry, Lucius Malfoy is, I've read about him. He's very dangerous in the specific way that people with legal authority and no particular attachment to using it fairly are dangerous. I know, Harry said. Is there any legal basis for him to challenge the rings directly? Through the board? No. The Board of Governors deals with school administration. Lordship rights are Wisengamot jurisdiction. He can't touch the rings through this mechanism. She picked up her fork. Which means this visit is about something else. Harry looked across at the Slytherin table. Draco was eating with the contained stillness of someone who had been told his father was coming and had feelings about that which he wasn't prepared to have in public. Daphne was 2 seats down from him, reading, not eating, her posture fractionally different than her usual composed line, tighter, more deliberate. Like she was concentrating on looking unbothered. Blaise caught Harry's eye across the hall and gave a minimal nod toward the entrance, then toward Draco, then back to Harry. A whole conversation in 3 gestures, he's here. Draco knows. Watch yourself. Harry nodded once. Ate his lunch. He encountered Lucius Malfoy at 4 in the afternoon, in the corridor outside the Charms classroom, which Harry suspected was not accidental staging on Malfoy's part. Lucius was exactly what the name suggested, tall, blonde in the silver pale way that looked designed, dressed in robes that communicated wealth without looking like they were trying to, carrying a cane with a snake's head handle that was just slightly too obviously symbolic to be accidental. He was accompanied by McGonagall, which meant someone had told McGonagall he was in the building and she had attached herself to him with the particular efficiency of a woman who doesn't trust someone and isn't going to let them wander unsupervised. Draco was with his father, a half-step behind. His face was careful and composed and almost exactly like Lucius's, which was either genetic or trained or, Harry suspected, both. Ah! Lucius stopped when he saw Harry, with the ease of a man who has choreographed a casual encounter and is performing it with conviction. Harry Potter. He smiled, and the smile was warm and completely empty. What a pleasure. I've heard a great deal about your arrival. I'm sure, Harry said, and stopped walking. He felt the serpens cognitio engage fully, reading Lucius the way it read everyone but deeper, faster, with more precision, because whatever lived in the Slytherin ring recognized something in Lucius Malfoy, recognized the quality of his ambition, the specific flavor of his manipulation, and was running at full capacity. Harry saw the layers in about 3 seconds, the performance of warmth over a cold calculation, the assessment happening behind his eyes as he looked at the rings, the thing that lived beneath both of those that was the truest thing about him, which was the conviction that the world was organized by power and that power belonged to those who understood how to hold it. Harry understood how to hold it. He stood in the corridor and waited, and McGonagall stood a careful half-step to the side, watching. "These must be the famous rings," Lucius said, glancing at Harry's hands with a casualness that had been thought about. "Remarkable. A vinculum activation, one doesn't hear of such things. You must find it all quite overwhelming." "Not particularly," Harry said. A pause. Lucius adjusted. "I've been speaking with Albus about the historical implications. As a member of the board, naturally I have an interest in ensuring that any unusual magical manifestation within the school is properly understood and documented." "Of course," Harry said agreeably. "Is there a specific record you're requesting?" "The board's charter covers educational administration. I'd want to make sure any review falls within proper scope." Lucius looked at him. The look lasted slightly longer than the encounter had been scripted for. Harry could see the recalculation happening. The original version of this conversation had involved a rather different 11-year-old, one who might be odd, or nervous, or defensive in an exploitable way. This version was not cooperating with the script. "You're well informed," Lucius said, and this time the warmth had a sharper edge under it. "I do a lot of reading," Harry said pleasantly. "Lord Potter." Lucius let the title land deliberately, testing it, seeing how Harry responded to hearing it said aloud. "I wonder if I might speak with you privately. As one with an interest in the noble houses, anything you'd like to say to me," Harry said, "you can say here. Professor McGonagall has administrative authority over student interactions with board members, that's in the Hogwarts Charter, Section 4. I wouldn't want to create any procedural irregularity." He looked at McGonagall with the straightforward expression of someone simply being helpful, and caught the almost imperceptible thing that happened in her eyes, which was something between approval and profound relief. Lucius smiled. It was the smile of a man who has recalibrated and is now doing it with grace, which Harry recognized as the move of someone genuinely skilled. "Of course," he said smoothly. "I simply wished to extend an invitation. My family has long had connections to the noble houses. The Malfoys were custodians, in an informal sense, of several Slytherin family traditions. Now that the lordship has been activated, I thought it natural to offer guidance. Experience. The weight of tradition can be difficult to navigate alone. The word alone was doing a great deal of work." "That's generous," Harry said. "I'll keep it in mind." He held Lucius's eyes for a moment longer than was strictly comfortable. "I should mention, I've been going through the Slytherin house records. The historical ones. I was surprised to find how many of the informal custodianship arrangements you mentioned weren't actually documented anywhere. In terms of legal standing." He paused. "Just something I noticed." Lucius Malfoy's composure was extraordinary. It didn't crack. But it did something subtler. It set, the way concrete sets, going from flexible to rigid in a moment, and Harry could see behind it very clearly now. The calculation had fully replaced the performance, and what the calculation was producing was the first genuine assessment of Harry as a problem rather than an obstacle. Good, Harry thought. Let him assess accurately. "Draco," Lucius said, still looking at Harry, "wait for me by the entrance hall." Draco moved. He passed Harry and their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Harry saw in that fraction, again, the honest thing, the thing Draco couldn't fully control, something complicated. Not quite gratitude. Not quite respect. Something on the way to both, that had a fair amount of resentment mixed in because of what it meant to feel it. When Draco was gone, Lucius said, quietly, dropping the register entirely, "You're not what I expected." "People say that," Harry said. "I imagine they do." Lucius looked at the rings one more time. The Slytherin ring specifically, the serpent moving in its slow loop. "I want you to understand something, Lord Potter. The wizarding world is more complex than Hogwarts will teach you. Alliances matter. Family matters. The houses you hold are not merely symbolic. They carry obligations. To the families who have served them. To the traditions that maintained them when the bloodlines were dormant. I understand obligations, Harry said. I grew up with people who made their obligations very clear. He met Lucius's eyes. I also understand the difference between an obligation and a debt that someone else decided I owed without asking me. The corridor was very quiet. We will speak again, Lucius said, and it was not the same as when Draco had said it. Draco's version had been a teenager reasserting dignity. Lucius's version was a statement of fact about how the future would proceed. Whenever you like, Harry said. Through proper channels. Lucius inclined his head, barely, precisely, and walked away. McGonagall waited until the sound of his footsteps had faded, then looked at Harry with an expression that had abandoned all pretense of professional neutrality. She looked like someone who has just watched a student do something extraordinary and is not going to say so directly but is also not going to pretend she didn't see it. Potter, she said. Professor. Section 4 of the Hogwarts Charter. Yes. Where did you learn that? Hermione found it, Harry said. She's been going through the charter since Tuesday. She said we should know our rights. He paused. She was right. McGonagall's jaw did something complex. 10 points to Gryffindor, she said finally, and walked away in the opposite direction, and her posture had the quality of someone returning to a position with their self-possession fully restored and a private opinion they would never, under any circumstances, express directly. He found Daphne in the library that evening. She was alone, no Blaze tonight, and the table had more books on it than usual. She'd been here a while. She looked up when he sat down. I heard, she said. How much? Most of it. Blaze has sources. She put her book down with the specific deliberateness of someone setting aside one thing to give full attention to another. You mentioned the documentation. The custodianship arrangements. It was true, Harry said. There's nothing in the records. I know. But you said it to warn him that you've been in the records, not just to correct a factual error. She looked at him steadily. That's a Slytherin move. I've got the ring for it, Harry said, which was becoming a reliable shorthand between them. Something shifted in her expression, the two-thirds smile again, and this time it went slightly further. Not quite three-thirds. But further. He'll come back with something more indirect, she said. That's how he works. The direct approach failed, so the next move will be through someone else. A third party who can apply pressure you can't quote back in a public corridor. Who does he have? In school. She considered. Draco, obviously. But Draco's already been deployed and hasn't worked. Parkinson, she reports back, but she doesn't have real leverage. There are 2 fifth years in Slytherin he's used before as intermediaries. Marcus Flint, the Quidditch captain, but that's too obvious. She paused. There's also Snape. Harry shook his head. Not Snape. Not for this. Daphne looked at him. You're certain? Yes. He was. The Serpens Cognitio had been clear about Snape in a way it had been clear about very few people. Snape's goals were his own, and some of them were complicated, and he wasn't warm and he wasn't particularly safe, but he wasn't Lucius Malfoy's instrument. Not anymore, if he ever fully had been. Whatever relationship they have, Malfoy won't use it for this. Daphne absorbed this. What are you going to do? Same thing I've been doing, Harry said. Stay informed, stay ahead, and don't flinch. He paused. We should access the memories. She looked at the rings on his hands. Now. Not now. But soon. If Malfoy's going to escalate, I want to know everything that chamber has. The memories, the parchments, all of it. Before the next move. She nodded slowly. This weekend. I'll tell Blaze and Granger. Then, why are you involving me in the tactical decisions? You hold the lordship. You could simply decide. I could, Harry said. But the bond runs both ways. The connection between us isn't decoration. The Slytherin line flows from your blood. When I access those memories, you'll feel something of them through the bond. I don't know exactly how much, but you will. Anne, he stopped. And, she said. And I trust your judgment. You see angles I'd miss. That's not me being generous, that's me being accurate. He looked at her directly. Also, the Greengrass family named you Daphne, which is the name of a girl from a myth where a god chased her and she said no and turned into a tree. I have a feeling you turn into a tree before you let someone make decisions that affect you without consulting you. She stared at him. That was, she started. Accurate? Strange, she said. And then, quietly, yes. Accurate. She looked back at her book. The expression on her face was doing something that wasn't quite the two-thirds smile, it was different, more private, and Harry felt it through the bond as a warmth that had nothing to do with magical theory. He opened his own book and they worked in the library for 2 hours and didn't speak much, and the silence was comfortable in the specific way that silence is comfortable between people who have established that they can tell each other difficult truths. The Quidditch announcement went up on Friday morning, which was either genuinely good timing or the universe's way of providing contrast, and Ron launched himself at the notice board with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for this specific information since September 1st. Trials, he said, turning around with the notice in his hand, which he'd apparently removed from the board, which was not standard practice. First years can try, oh. No, first years can't try. Sorry, Harry. That's fine, Harry said. Still. You'd be, Ron looked at the notice with the expression of someone doing complicated arithmetic. You can fly, right? I haven't tried yet. But you'd be good. I can just tell. How can you tell? Ron made a gesture that was the physical expression of I don't know, I just can. Hermione confiscated the notice and returned it to the board. Harry watched the gathering cluster of students reading it and thought about flying. He'd been thinking about it since he'd seen the broom cupboard at the edge of the Quidditch pitch on their first castle tour. Something in the Potter ring responded warmly whenever it came up. He found a reason to go to the pitch that afternoon. Not with any particular plan, he just walked there, hands in pockets, following the warmth of the Potter ring, and stood at the edge of the pitch in the late October cold with the stands empty and the goalposts casting long shadows across the grass, and breathed the air, which was different here than inside the castle. Cleaner. More open. Like the sky was closer. He'd never been on a broom in his life. He'd also never had any money, never had books, never had a friend until September, never had a room with a door, never had anyone who chose to spend time with him deliberately and kindly, and he'd managed every one of those firsts in the last 2 months. The broom was probably manageable. He became aware he wasn't alone. Daphne was sitting in the lowest row of the Slytherin stands with a book open on her knee, but she wasn't reading it. She was watching the pitch with an expression he hadn't seen before on her, open, in the way that things left alone long enough eventually open, like a house with all the windows uncovered. She looked up. Their eyes met across the pitch. I come here to think, she said, across the distance. I came to look at the pitch, Harry said, with equal honesty. She moved her book slightly to make room on the bench. Which was either an invitation or an incidental gesture, and Harry walked over to see which it was, and it was an invitation. He sat beside her. The pitch spread before them, empty and wide. Do you play? He asked. No. I watch. A pause. My mother played. Chaser. She said flying was the one thing in the world that was only itself. No politics. No history. Just the air. That sounds right, Harry said. They sat for a moment in the quiet. The bond was very warm here, out in the open air, the Slytherin ring and the connection between them humming at the same frequency. Harry could feel it clearly, not intrusively, not in a way that overrode his own sense of himself, but like an additional sense, an awareness of her presence that was specific and distinct and real. My father is going to come to Hogwarts, Daphne said. Not a question. Not an anxiety. Information. Not because of Lucius. He'll come because of the bond. He'll want to assess you. What's he like? Thorough, she said. Fair. Cautious. He'll want to understand what the vinculum means for the family. She paused. He's also going to be, she searched for the word, territorial. The Greengrass name is not as prominent as Malfoy, but it is older, and my father has a specific relationship with old things. What do I tell him? She looked at him. The truth. He'll know if you don't. A pause. Tell him what you told me. That you trust the bond, that you're not trying to exploit it, and that the Slytherin lordship was in our blood and has found its proper place. She looked back at the pitch. He'll still want to look at you for approximately 3 hours before deciding what he thinks. Fair warning. I grew up with Vernon Dursley, Harry said. 3 hours of scrutiny sounds manageable. Daphne turned to look at him, and this time the expression on her face had fully opened into something unguarded. Dursley. That's your mother's sister's family. Yeah. How were they? He thought about the cupboard. The bare bulb. The crack of light under the door. He thought about 10 years of be invisible, be quiet, be small, and how completely useless all of that training was now that he'd stopped doing any of it. Difficult, he said. They didn't want me there and they made sure I knew it. He said it the way he described the platform to Dumbledore, matter of fact, just the facts. I spent a lot of time in a small space with nothing to do but think. I got good at reading people and bad at assuming anyone was going to be kind without reason. He paused. It turns out that's useful preparation for Hogwarts politics, so I'm choosing to look at it that way. Daphne was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved across the pitch, sending a dried leaf skipping across the goal line. I built the Ice Queen thing at 8, she said, and the directness of it, the suddenness of it, told him she hadn't planned to say it. Someone at a family gathering said something cruel about my mother's bloodline, the Slytherin connection, which they didn't know was real, they just knew she was different, and I cried in front of everyone. I was 8. She paused. I decided that was the last time. She looked at him. The armor is real. I'm not pretending I don't have it. But the bond doesn't let me use it the same way with you. I noticed that. I won't weaponize it, Harry said. I know, she said, and the simplicity of it, the absence of qualification, was more trust than she'd extended to almost anyone, and they both understood that without saying it. They sat in the Slytherin stands until the light went blue and the air went cold and the castle began throwing warm lights through its windows, and then they went inside, walking through the November evening side by side, not quite touching, with the bond warm and real between them, and Harry thought that whatever Lucius Malfoy's next move was, and whatever Draco was planning, and whatever Dumbledore was deciding to tell him and deciding to keep back, all of it was manageable. Because he wasn't managing it alone. He hadn't been, since that half-second on the platform. The duel was Saturday morning and no one planned it. Or rather, Draco planned part of it, and Marcus Flint planned part of it, and the part that neither of them planned was the part where Harry didn't behave the way a first-year was supposed to behave when a seventh-year Quidditch captain and the Slytherin prefect's chosen representative backed him into the corridor outside the library with 3 other students and the clear intention of demonstrating something. Harry had been going to the library. He'd had his bag over his shoulder and his mind on the Slytherin vault and the memory access question, and then 4 people had materialized from the alcove to his left in a way that was clearly organized and he'd stopped walking and looked at them. Flint was big, which people used as a substitute for threatening when they hadn't thought carefully about what actually constituted a threat. He had his wand out but pointed at the floor, which was meant to read as casual. Potter, he said. Word from the upper years. I'm listening, Harry said. The rings you're wearing. They're causing disruption. In Slytherin. It upsets the order of things. He said order of things with the specific weight of someone who'd been told to use those words. It would be better for everyone if you wore them quietly. Kept the claims private. Harry looked at him with genuine curiosity. Who told you to say that? I'm saying it myself. You're saying it on behalf of someone who told you what to say. Harry looked past Flint at the 3 students behind him, 2 fifth years he'd noted before as Malfoy adjacent, and 1 6th year he didn't know. Flint, you're a 7th year. The rings are legally recognized. Telling me to wear them quietly is, what exactly? A suggestion? A threat? A suggestion, Flint said, and the word didn't fit with his body language. Right. Harry reached into his bag, pulled out his wand, 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather, and the wand had always felt like his since the first time he'd picked it up in Ollivander's shop, like it was recognizing something, and held it at his side. Not pointed. Just present. Let me make a counter-suggestion. He felt the 5 rings warm simultaneously. All 5, for the first time, at the same moment, the same temperature, an alignment that he hadn't felt before, a convergence, like 5 instruments finding the same note. It didn't hurt. It didn't even feel dramatic. It felt like something clicking into place, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting for exactly this alignment of circumstance. The Slytherin lordship carries certain rights over members of Slytherin House, Harry said, and his voice was the same ordinary voice he used for everything, no performance in it, just accurate. I haven't invoked those rights because I haven't needed to. But they include the right to formally reprimand members who act in ways that compromise the House's interests. He looked at Flint directly. Intimidating a fellow student in a corridor, especially a student who holds lordship over your house, is not in Slytherin's interests. It's embarrassing. And it's the kind of thing that gets written down. Flint's wand had come up slightly. You're going to threaten me with paperwork. I'm going to remind you, Harry said quietly, that whoever sent you doesn't care whether this works. They just want to see how I respond. They're watching the encounter, not participating in it, which should tell you something about how much they value your involvement. He held Flint's eyes. Do you actually want to escalate this? Because I'm 11 years old, which means any teacher who finds this situation will ask exactly 2 questions. Why was a 7th year confronting a 1st year in a corridor, and whose idea was it? The silence ran. One of the 5th years moved back. Just 1 step. But it shifted the geometry of the group. Flint lowered his wand. He did it slowly, with the care of a man preserving dignity, and Harry let him do it, because he had no interest in humiliating Flint. Flint was a blunt instrument being used by someone smarter, and blunt instruments deserved some consideration when they weren't actually striking anything. Smart, Flint said, and meant it as an insult and didn't quite manage it. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it as neither. He stepped past the group, walked to the library, and sat down at his table and opened his book, and the 5 rings cooled back to their individual temperatures, the convergence dissolving, and he sat with the memory of what that simultaneous warmth had felt like and understood that it was what full activation felt like, and that he'd only barely grazed the surface of it. Hermione arrived 20 minutes later. She looked at his face and said, "Something happened," without making it a question. "Flint," Harry said. "Corridor. Malfoy's doing." She sat down. "Are you all right?" "Completely." He paused. "Hermione. When all 5 rings warmed at once, I felt something. Like what they can do together is significantly different than what any of them can do separately." Her eyes sharpened. "Like a resonance effect. Like 5 instruments finding the same note," Harry said. "I need to understand what that means before someone makes me use it without preparation." Hermione had her notebook out in 3 seconds. "Tell me exactly what it felt like," she said, "and don't skip anything." He told her. She wrote it all down. And the petrol ring, which had been patient all day, the way it always was, warmed slightly in a way that felt like approval for the question being asked at all. He found Draco that evening on the 7th floor, which was an accident on both their parts, both of them coming from different directions to the corridor that had nothing particular to recommend it except its distance from anyone else. They stopped walking at the same moment and looked at each other. "Flint," Harry said. Draco said nothing. "I didn't hurt him," Harry said. "I could have, probably. The rings were, it doesn't matter." "I didn't." Draco's jaw moved. "My father, I know what your father is doing." Harry kept his voice level and direct. "Not unkind, not aggressive. He's pressuring you to produce results through whatever mechanisms you have available. And you're trying, because he's your father, and because the alternative to trying is explaining to him why you didn't." He looked at Draco. "How often does he accept that explanation?" The silence that followed was the most honest thing Draco had produced in their entire acquaintance. He didn't answer the question, but the fact that he didn't answer it was itself the answer. "I'm not your enemy," Harry said. "I'd like to be very clear about that. The rings aren't aimed at your family. The Slytherin lordship doesn't mean I'm going to reorganize house politics for fun. I'm 11. I have homework and I'm trying to learn to cast a levitation charm reliably, and I'm also apparently managing a minor political crisis that I didn't ask for." He paused. "If your father wants a fight about the lordship, that fight is between me and him. Not you." Draco stared at him with the expression of a boy who has been given a version of events that contradicts his briefing and isn't sure which to believe. "He'll never accept that." "I know," Harry said. "But you should." He walked away down the corridor, and behind him he heard Draco not say anything for a very long time, which felt like something. The Slytherin ring was warm. The black ring, cooler, thoughtful. And the Peveril ring, patient as always, deep as always, waiting for something that was coming toward them all with the slow certainty of a tide. Harry went back to Gryffindor Tower, sat in the chair by the fire, and looked at his 5 rings in the firelight, and thought about tides and timing and the specific patience required for battles that hadn't started yet. The fire crackled. Hedwig landed on the chair back and clicked her beak at him. "Yeah," Harry told her. "I know. It's going to get more complicated before it gets simpler." She ruffled her feathers with the dignified impatience of someone who had expected more specific information. "Saturday," he said. "The vault. The memories. We start understanding what we're actually carrying." She seemed, in her way, to accept this. Harry put his hands down on his knees, 5 rings catching 5 pieces of firelight, and Gryffindor Tower settled around him warm and alive, and below in the dungeons the ancient chamber waited with its sealed vault and its old memories, and outside the castle walls Lucius Malfoy was presumably at Malfoy Manor deciding on his next move, and Harry sat in the middle of all of it and wasn't afraid of any of it. He was just a boy who'd grown up in a cupboard and learned, very early, that fear was only useful when it made you careful. He was careful. He was also 5 times a lord and the heir of 3 founders and connected by ancient blood magic to a girl who was the most genuinely interesting person he'd met in his life. He had things worse than this. Much worse. And survived them with no rings at all. Chapter 5, The Heir of What Was Broken. The memories came in like water. Not violent, not disorienting, nothing like the plunge Harry had half expected from Hermione's descriptions of pensive immersion. It was more like wading in from a shallow edge, the cold rising gradually until you were in it without having felt the exact moment of submersion. 1 second he was sitting cross-legged on the stone floor of the ancient chamber, the open veil warm against his palm, his eyes closed and the Slytherin ring radiating a heat that moved up his arm and into his chest and then through the bond, and then he was somewhere else. A room he didn't know. Stone walls, a fire, a desk covered in manuscripts. A window showing sky that was recognizably Scottish, grey and high and enormous, but the landscape beyond it was different, younger, less settled, trees where there would later be grounds. And a man at the desk, writing, and Harry understood without being told that this was Salazar Slytherin, because the ring on his finger and the ring on the man's finger were the same ring, and the recognition was immediate and physical. He was old. That was the first thing. Not ancient in a magical way, just old, the way men get when they've spent their lives in thought and worry, lines carved by both. He had dark eyes that moved over the manuscript with the focus of someone who hasn't stopped working and won't until the thing is finished, and his hands were a scholar's hands, ink-stained, slightly unsteady with age. He was writing a letter. Harry couldn't read it, the handwriting was archaic and the angle was wrong, but he could feel the emotion in it, which was the strangest part of the memory access Hermione had warned him about. The Memoria Hereditas didn't just show you images, it carried the emotional residue of the moment. And what Salazar Slytherin felt while writing this letter was grief that had aged into something quieter, more settled. The grief of a man who has accepted a loss and is now simply living with it. There was a second presence in the room. A woman, standing at the window, watching the grounds below. Young, dark-haired, her posture carrying the same quality as the man's, intelligent, watchful, self-contained. His daughter. Harry knew her name the way you know things in dreams, Seraphina. She turned from the window. "You're writing to Godric again." "I'm writing to no one." The old man's voice was dry, precise, Scottish in its vowels. Godric made his position clear. Godric's position was that you were wrong, not that he hated you. She crossed the room. "There's a difference. The school is complete. The magic is laid. The argument is over." He kept writing. "What I build here will last without my name attached to it." Seraphina stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. "The vault will hold what needs holding. For whoever has the right blood to open it. And if no one ever does, then no one does." He set down the quill. Turned to look at his daughter with an expression that was simple and clear and devastatingly human. "I wasn't wrong about everything, Sarah. I was wrong about where the wrong came from. I thought it was blood. I thought impurity was the weakness." He paused. "It was fear. It was always fear. Mine as much as anyone's." The memory blurred. Shifted. Another fragment, the Chamber of Secrets, vast and greenlit, and Slytherin's face younger here, middle-aged, standing in front of the great carved statue of himself with an expression that was mortified and resigned in equal measure. "This was Phineas's idea," he said to someone off to Harry's left. "I told him it was excessive." A laugh from the left, warm and familiar, that Harry couldn't attach to a face. Another shift. The chamber again, but different, the statue's mouth open, the passage into the deeper section visible, and Slytherin alone, placing something at the base of the statue, something small, murmuring in Parseltongue, sealing it. Then darkness. Then the chamber around Harry again, and the bond. He came back to himself slowly. The vial was empty, clear glass, the silver liquid gone, absorbed through his palm. The Slytherin ring was cooling from hot to warm. And through the bond he could feel Daphne. She was sitting across from him in the chamber, 3 feet away, and her eyes were open and her face had the expression of someone who has just received information through a channel they didn't fully control. She'd felt something of it. Not the visual content, the bond didn't carry images, only impressions, but the emotional residue. The grief. The correction. He regretted it, she said. It wasn't a question. He said he was wrong about where the weakness came from, Harry said. His own voice sounded slightly distant, the way it did when you'd been thinking very hard in a different direction. That it was fear. Not blood. Daphne absorbed this. That doesn't redeem everything. No, Harry agreed. But it's not nothing. Hermione, sitting to Harry's right with her notebook on her knee and her quill having moved at considerable speed through his description of the vision, looked up. The chamber. He placed something at the base of the statue. Something small. Did you see what it was? No. But he sealed it in Parseltongue. Harry looked at the now empty vial. There's more in the other parchments. Hermione, already reading, she said, because she'd been working through the rolled parchments since they'd entered the chamber, organizing them by the date marks at their edges. Harry. One of these is a floor plan. She held it up. The parchment was large, showing a cross-section of the castle from foundation to towers, and certain passages were marked in green ink with annotations in Parseltongue that Harry could read: water, voice, blood only, this one is blocked, and at the bottom of the plan, well below the main basement level, a chamber marked with a single symbol. The Slytherin crest. The Chamber of Secrets is here, Harry said, touching the symbol. This is the actual location. We are not going to the Chamber of Secrets, Hermione said immediately. Not today, Harry said, which was not the same thing, and they both knew it. Blaise, who had been leaning against the far wall with his arms folded and the expression of a man watching events develop and withholding judgment, said, "What did the second fragment show?" Before the chamber went dark. Harry described it: the middle-aged Slytherin, the statue's mouth, the thing being placed and sealed. He was storing something. Not the memories, those were in the vault here. Something in the chamber itself. Something he didn't want in the same place as the memories, Daphne said. He separated them deliberately. 2 archives, Hermione said softly. One here, accessible through the vault, for the memories and records. One in the chamber, sealed deeper, for whatever he didn't want anyone finding by accident, Harry finished. The chamber was quiet except for the steady green burn of the ancient torches. Harry looked up at the serpent carvings in the vaulted ceiling, moving slowly overhead, and thought about a man who had built something that lasted 1,000 years and spent his final years regretting part of what he'd built into it. He thought about the letter. About it was always fear. Mine as much as anyone's. He thought about Lucius Malfoy and the specific flavor of fear that drove men like him, not the fear of darkness or pain, the simpler fear, the fear of being displaced, of having the world reorganize around an order that didn't center you. The fear that made you write letters and send intermediaries and deploy your own son as a tool and call it protecting your family. He looked at his rings. Then he stood up. We come back for the parchments. All of them. I want to know everything in this vault before we decide what to do with it. He looked at the 3 of them, Hermione with her notebook, Blaise with his careful neutrality, Daphne with her grey eyes open and reading him the way she was learning to. Agreed? Nods. All 3. Good. He looked at the box, the sealed serpent. Thank you, he said in Parseltongue, which he hadn't planned, and the serpent lifted its head and tasted the air and settled back, and the chamber felt, for a moment, like a room that had been waiting a very long time to be used properly and was satisfied to be so. Halloween arrived with the castle draped in decorations that the enchanted ceiling turned spooky before anyone had a chance to eat dinner, which was theatrical timing Harry had to admire. The great hall smelled of candle wax and roasted things and someone's attempt at a bat-shaped pastry that had not survived the oven's interpretation. The enchanted jack-o'-lanterns on the Hufflepuff table kept winking at each other. Peeves had spent the morning dropping rubber spiders onto first years from the hidden gallery above the third-floor corridor, and even Filch had settled for merely shouting rather than his usual full pursuit response, which may have been the holiday spirit or may have been strategic energy conservation. Harry was in a fine mood. He'd been in the chamber memory twice more since Saturday, each session accessing different fragments, different pieces of Slytherin's life and thought, each one layered and specific in the way that actual human experience was specific rather than symbolic. The chamber was still on his list, but he wasn't rushing it. The vault had more to give, and he was learning to be patient in the Peveril Ring way, the deep, geological patience, the kind that understood time as an asset rather than a cost. He sat at dinner between Ron and Hermione, with Neville Longbottom on Hermione's other side, and ate and talked and listened to the Weasley twins 2 seats down conduct a running commentary on the decorations that made Ron inhale pumpkin juice through his nose. Across the hall, the Slytherin table had achieved its usual controlled atmosphere, and Daphne was eating and watching the enchanted ceiling with an expression of what Harry had come to recognize as private enjoyment that she wasn't going to perform publicly. The bond was warm and even, the way it got when they were in the same room. He was halfway through a piece of tart when Quirrell burst through the great hall doors. The teacher was always slightly unwell looking, the stammer, the nervous quality, the turban that he'd worn every day since school started and that Snape had looked at, once, in Harry's presence, with an expression of absolute contemptuous assessment that Harry had filed and not yet fully deciphered. But Quirrell now was beyond nervous. He was grey, shaking, grabbing at the doorframe with both hands, and his voice when he managed it cut through the entire hall like a stone through glass. "Troll, in the dungeons, thought you should know," he fainted. The great hall produced an enormous noise. Dumbledore stood and the noise dropped immediately. The man had a particular authority that operated somewhat beyond charm and into the instinctual, and directed prefects to lead students back to dormitories, heads of house to their common rooms, and the general sense of organized purpose suppressed the panic from boiling into something worse. Harry stood up and three things happened in his head at the same time. First, a troll in the dungeon was between most of the Slytherin students and their common room, which meant they were being directed into the path of whatever was loose, which Dumbledore had presumably accounted for in his instructions but Harry wanted to verify. Second, the castle had sent him a pulse when Quirrell entered the hall, not the familiar gentle breath pulse but a sharper one, an alert, and it was pointed not toward the dungeons but toward the third floor, which was where they'd been told not to go since September. Third, Hermione had gone pale beside him. "Hermione," he said. She looked at him. "The girls' bathroom on the second floor," she said quietly, in the voice of someone reporting a fact they wished weren't true. "I went there after lunch. I've been there all afternoon. I didn't come back for dinner yet when, I came back just before Quirrell," she stopped. "But you were at dinner," Ron said. "I came back when everyone was already seated. I was late." She looked at Harry. "If the troll is in the dungeons and it came up from the ground floor, it could have passed the second floor bathroom," Harry said. Her face confirmed it. He looked at the Gryffindor prefect, Percy, who was currently organizing the first years with the focused intensity of a man born for emergency procedures. Percy's back was to them. Ron and Harry looked at each other. "Right," Harry said, and they went the other way. The corridor was already emptying, students filing upward toward towers and dormitories, the prefects driving the flow with practiced authority. Harry and Ron moved against it, which was easier than it should have been because the castle was helping, the stone beneath Harry's feet sending him the most efficient path, the same way it gave him directions in the dungeon, and he moved through the thinning crowd and down the stairs to the second floor with Ron one step behind, making the specific sound of someone running while simultaneously questioning the decision. The bathroom was ahead. Harry could smell it before he saw the door, something enormous and animal and wrong, the particular stench of something alive that didn't live indoors and was not happy about the change. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The troll was massive. 12 feet, gray-skinned, club in one hand, looking around the bathroom with the dull and thoroughgoing confusion of something that has destroyed everything in range and run out of targets. Several sink basins had been reduced to rubble. A stall partition was gone. And in the corner, between the wall and the collapsed remains of another stall, was Hermione. She must have run in ahead of them, which was either brave or instinctive or both, pressed against the tiles and very still and very white-faced. The troll hadn't seen her yet. It was looking at the destruction with the expression of something waiting to be told what to do next. Harry stepped into the bathroom and the troll's head swung toward the door. He felt the 5 rings ignite simultaneously, the same convergence he'd felt in the corridor with Flint, but deeper this time, fuller, the note held rather than touched. The heat ran up both arms and across his chest and settled between his shoulder blades, and his wand was in his hand without a conscious decision to put it there, holly and phoenix feather, warm and alert. "Ron," Harry said, completely calmly. "Get to Hermione. The troll is between me and, I'll move it." Harry stepped fully into the room. The troll raised its club. It wasn't intelligent, but it had the animal understanding of threat proximity, and something in its instinct said this small thing was wrong in a way the other small things weren't, maybe the rings, maybe the magic radiating off them, maybe the simple fact that Harry wasn't running. It swung the club. Harry ducked under it and moved left, and the club took out 2 more sink basins in a spray of porcelain, and he thought Wingardium Leviosa and threw everything he had through the wand, Potter instinct and Slytherin precision and Ravenclaw understanding and the deep Peveril patience that knew timing was everything, and the club tore free of the troll's grip and hit the ceiling with enough force that pieces of stone came down. The troll looked up at where its club had been. Harry thought stupefy, which he was not supposed to know, which was in his second-year textbook, which he'd read in the first week because he read everything available and hadn't thought much of the restriction, and felt the spell come out of his wand differently than anything he'd cast in class. Not a neat classroom-controlled beam. A concussive burst of red that hit the troll in the center of its chest and sent it backward into the wall with a crash that Harry was fairly sure the teachers would feel through the castle. The troll slid down the wall and sat on the bathroom floor with the expression of something that had been turned off. The bathroom was suddenly very quiet. Ron was beside Hermione. She was sitting on the floor now, her knees up, breathing carefully. She looked at the troll. Looked at Harry. Looked at Ron. Looked at Harry again. "The stupefy," she said. "That's data third-year minimum," I read ahead, Harry said, and lowered his wand. Footsteps in the corridor. Loud ones. The bathroom door flew open and McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell arrived in a rapid sequence. McGonagall took in the room, the destroyed fixtures, the unconscious troll, Hermione and Ron on the floor, Harry standing in the middle of it with a wand still warm in his hand, and her face went through several things very fast. Snape looked at the troll. Then at Harry. Then, very briefly, at the rings, and the rings had the specific quality they carried when all five were resonating, hotter, more present, more visible in some way that wasn't about light. Snape said nothing. His expression was precisely controlled and his eyes carried something Harry couldn't fully read with the serpens cognitio, which was unusual. Quirrell made a small sound and stepped backward, and Harry's attention caught on this the way it caught on things that didn't fit, and the thing that didn't fit was the particular quality of Quirrell's withdrawal, not away from the troll, away from Harry. Away from the ring specifically. A flinch, not a step. Harry filed it. Deeply. Under very important, return to this. Would someone like to explain this? McGonagall said, in the voice she used when she already knew the answer and wanted to see if the answer she received was honest. Ron launched into an explanation that was earnest and reasonably accurate and gave Hermione more credit for bravery than the situation strictly required, which was kind of him. Harry watched Quirrell while Ron talked. The defense teacher was in the doorway, pale, doing an excellent impression of someone recovering from a faint, and his eyes were moving around the room with a quick, assessing quality underneath the shaking hands that didn't match the character he'd constructed for himself. Hermione, Harry noticed, was watching him too. Their eyes met. He gave the smallest possible nod toward Quirrell. She gave the smallest possible nod back, meaning she'd seen it too, meaning she'd be in the library tomorrow with every book about Quirinus Quirrell she could locate. McGonagall gave Ron and Harry a long look, gave Hermione 5 points for sheer nerve, and told all three of them to return to Gryffindor Tower immediately and not stop for anything on the way. She did not take points. She also did not look at the rings again, but Harry could feel that she'd registered their temperature, and that she'd registered Quirrell's reaction, and that she was going to think about both of those things in the privacy of her own office with the careful thoroughness she applied to everything. The three of them walked back to the tower. The stupefy, Hermione said, as they climbed the first staircase. Second year, Harry said. Third, actually. Some editions have it in second-year curriculum, most don't. She paused. Also it came out of you like a stunning spell from a 7th year, which I think we both know had nothing to do with the spell text and everything to do with, she gestured at his hands. The convergence, Harry said. When all five are running together. I need to understand how to control it. It was stronger than I expected. It's stronger when you're protecting someone, Ron said, with the simple observational accuracy he produced occasionally without warning, like a stopped clock. They both looked at him. What? It is. The first one, moving the club, that was controlled. The second one, he paused. When it moved, I thought Hermione was going to get hit. I think you did too. Harry had. For 1 second, the troll's movement toward Hermione's corner had produced something cold and absolute in his chest, and then the 5 rings had fired together with a heat that was the opposite of cold, and the spell had come out of him like something necessary rather than chosen. I need to understand the parameters, Harry said. I need to know what triggers it and what it does and what the costs are. There are always costs in old magic, Hermione said, not alarmed, just accurate. I'll look for it. Tomorrow. Tonight, he stopped walking. They were on the 3rd floor. Not quite at the moving staircase that would take them up to Gryffindor. And the castle had sent him a pulse. Subtle, the breath kind, not the alert kind, but directional. He looked down the corridor. To his right. The 3rd floor. The corridor they'd been told not to go to. In the general chaos of the troll, the corridors were empty, the teachers elsewhere, the students penned in their common rooms. Harry, Hermione said. I'm not going now, he said. I'm noting. He looked down the corridor. The pulse came again, not urgent, just present. The castle showing him something it thought he should know was there. There's something down there that knows I'm here. The 3-headed dog, Ron said, with the confidence of someone who had already catalogued this information. Fred and George found out. It's guarding a trapdoor. What's under the trapdoor? Harry said. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. Don't know. Harry looked at the corridor for a moment longer. The Peveril ring was cool and patient, the way it always was when he was in proximity to something that had to do with old magic and deep time. The black ring had cooled too, specifically, precisely, in the way it cooled when danger was adjacent rather than immediate. The thing behind the trapdoor was significant. The thing behind the trapdoor was also what Quirrell had been trying to get to, or what he was being directed to get to, and the feint at the dinner table had been the beginning of something that had been stopped tonight by a troll that was supposed to have served as a distraction. A distraction from the 3rd floor. The troll hadn't wandered into the dungeons by accident. Someone let it in, Harry said quietly. Hermione's pencil appeared. Say that again. The troll. Someone let it in. As a distraction, to get the teachers away from the 3rd floor. He looked at her. And Quirrell, the feint, the announcement. He's the only teacher who knew where the troll was beforehand, because he was the one who found it. Or said he found it. Hermione stared at him. You think Quirrell let in the troll? I think Quirrell has been hiding something under that turban since September, and I think whatever it is flinched away from my rings tonight, and I think the thing under the trapdoor is what it wants. He paused. I also think we're not doing anything about that tonight. Tonight we go to the tower and we go to bed, and tomorrow Hermione looks up everything she can find about Quirrell and I go through more of the Slytherin parchments and we figure out what's actually under that trapdoor before we decide anything. Yes, Hermione said, firmly and with visible relief. That is the correct approach. Absolutely. Right, Ron said. Good. Bed. I'm all for bed. They went to the tower. But Harry didn't sleep immediately. He sat in the chair by the fire again, it had become his chair, in the specific way that pieces of furniture become specific people's chairs in shared spaces, and no one sat in it except him, and he looked at his hands and thought. Quirrell. The turban. The flinch. The troll as distraction. The 3rd floor corridor and the trapdoor and the thing beneath it. The pulse from the corridor, the Peveril ring's specific response, not alerting, not warming, something else. Something more deliberate. As if the ring recognized the nature of what was hidden down there. As if Death's gifts understood what Death's opposite looked like. He didn't have enough yet. He had a shape but not the contents. He had the architecture of something but not its name. He spread his fingers on his knees. 5 rings. The 5th, Ravenclaw, his quiet favorite, the one that warmed in libraries and classrooms and conversations where something was being genuinely understood, was doing something tonight it hadn't done before. It was warm, yes, but the warmth was moving. Not static. Like it was pointing. Not at the third floor. Higher. The astronomy tower, Harry thought, which was strange because there was nothing particular about the astronomy tower, except that it was the highest point of the castle, and from it you could see everything, and the Ravenclaw ring, which resonated with understanding and perspective, might simply be telling him to get above the problem and look at it from outside. He looked at the fire. He thought about Salazar Slytherin in that stone room, writing a letter to no one and saying it was always fear, mine as much as anyone's. He thought about the thing in the chamber, placed at the base of the statue, sealed in Parseltongue. He thought about the founders building something they intended to last. He thought about Quirrell's eyes moving around the bathroom with that quick assessing quality under the performance of helplessness. He thought about Dumbledore's smile. The warmth of it and the different thing underneath. And he thought about Daphne, because the bond was always warmly present and tonight it was particularly clear, she was awake, he could tell, somewhere below in the dungeon, sitting up in the dark the way he was sitting up in the fire, thinking her own version of these thoughts with her own particular angle. He felt through the bond, very deliberately, with the same care he used to access the lordship rights, not pushing, not demanding, just extending. Like opening a hand. The response came back, awareness. Acknowledgement. A warmth that was her specific warmth, distinct from the Slytherin ring's warmth, distinct from anything magical. Just Daphne, awake and thinking, feeling him on the other end of the bond and choosing not to close it. He sat with that for a moment. Then he opened his bag, took out parchment and quill, and began writing what he knew in organized columns: Quirrell, Troll, Trapdoor, Third Floor, Peverell Response, Dumbledore's Hidden Knowledge, the Thing in the Chamber. He was precise and specific, and the Slytherin ring helped him organize it and the Ravenclaw ring helped him see the connections and the Potter ring, warm and instinctive and direct, underlined the conclusions. By the time the fire burned low, he had a picture. Not complete. But enough of one to know its shape. Enough to know that whatever was under the trapdoor on the third floor was something someone was trying to steal, and the someone had access to Hogwarts in an official capacity, and the theft was intended to serve something, or someone, whose nature the Peverell ring understood better than Harry did yet. He rolled the parchment. Put it with his notes. Went to bed. He dreamed of a chamber beneath a chamber, and a door sealed with a sound that was not quite a word, and beyond the door something very old and very hungry pressing against the stone, and the 5 rings on his hands burning white in the darkness, holding the door closed, and it was enough. For now it was enough. He found Daphne at breakfast before she'd opened her book. This was significant because Daphne opened her book approximately 30 seconds after sitting down, which was her version of a morning routine, and finding her with both hands free and her attention unoccupied meant she'd been waiting for him. "You were awake," she said. "So were you." He sat across from her. Blaise wasn't there yet. "What were you thinking about?" "Quirrell," she said. "Of course." "The flinch," Harry said. "And the turban." She met his eyes. "My grandmother wore a turban. She was very particular about them. She owned 11 and each one was for a different occasion and she would not be seen in public without one. She said it was tradition." Daphne paused. "She also said the only other reason a wizard wore a turban that completely was if they were concealing something they couldn't conceal by other means." "Your grandmother sounded like she was interesting." "She was Seraphina Slytherin's granddaughter on 3 removals, Daphne said simply. She knew more than she said and said more than she wrote down. It was a family philosophy. "What's under the turban?" Harry said, mostly to the air. Daphne folded her hands on the table. "Not a what? A who?" She held his eyes. The flinch wasn't from the rings in aggregate. It was from one ring specifically. She glanced at his left hand. "The Peverell ring. I felt it through the bond when Quirrell stepped back, a specific resonance, like a note being struck near something that vibrates at the opposite frequency. She paused. Death's gifts and what death opposes. Something that doesn't want to die, Harry said. Something that can't die, Daphne said. Or believes it can't. They looked at each other across the breakfast table in the ordinary morning noise of the great hall, with students talking and owls arriving and the enchanted ceiling showing a clean November sky, and the shape of it was there between them, not complete, but close, and getting closer. We need the chamber, Harry said. I know. Whatever Slytherin sealed at the base of the statue, if it's what I think it might be, if it's information or a weapon or something that was put away specifically for this, then it was put there for whoever came next, Daphne said. For the heir. For you. She looked at the rings. He built the school to last. He said so. He wasn't only building a school. Harry thought about the memory, the middle-aged Slytherin, the object placed and sealed, the care of it. A man who had lived long enough to regret his fear. Who had revised his understanding of the world and wanted to make sure something useful survived the revision. This weekend, Harry said. The chamber. We go. Daphne nodded. All four of us. I'm not arguing. She reached for her book. Opened it. The morning routine signal, the conversation concluded, and Harry picked up his own breakfast and ate and thought about a 1,000-year-old plan unfolding around an 11-year-old boy who'd grown up in a cupboard, and the absurdity of it would have been funny if the Peveril ring hadn't been so quietly, consistently serious about the whole thing. Blaise appeared, dropped his bag, looked at both of them. You're planning something. We're eating breakfast, Daphne said, without looking up. You're planning something while eating breakfast, Blaise said, and sat down, and picked up his fork with the expression of a man who has accepted that his life now contains whatever this is, and has decided that's fine. Ron appeared on Harry's left, sleep-rumpled, reaching immediately for the sausages. He looked at Blaise across the table. You know they're planning something, he said. I know, Blaise said. Just as long as we're all aware, Ron said, and poured himself juice, and the four of them sat at the edge of breakfast in the great warm-lit hall, and the fifth ring, Ravenclaw, curious and bright and hungry for understanding, ran warmest of all, because there was so much left to understand and the understanding was almost within reach. Harry looked up at the enchanted ceiling. Clean November sky. The year was moving. Something at the end of it was moving too, coming toward them with the slow certainty the Peveril ring understood, and Harry Potter sat at the center of a 1,000-year-old bloodline's plan and felt, very clearly, completely ready. Chapter 6, What Lords Are Made of. The Chamber of Secrets smelled like the bottom of the world. Not unpleasant exactly, ancient stone and cold water and something mineral, the smell of places that have been sealed for centuries and developed their own weather systems. Harry led them down through the passage that had opened from behind one of the lesser bathroom mirrors on the second floor, a Parseltongue command to the copper serpent worked into the mirror frame that he'd found in Slytherin's floor plan, in the notations he'd spent the week translating with Hermione's help and Daphne's memory for archaic wizarding dialect. The passage was narrow enough for single file and long enough that the torches, which lit automatically at Harry's passage, green-flamed, the same as the ancient chamber, made the descent look like something from a myth. Ron was behind Harry. Hermione behind Ron. Daphne last, which was her preference. She'd said, without explanation, that she liked to be able to see everyone ahead of her, and Harry had recognized the instinct without comment because it was the same instinct he had when he sat with his back to a wall. Blaise wasn't with them. He'd looked at the passage entrance, looked at Harry, and said, I will be more useful above ground knowing where you are than below ground being a fifth person you have to worry about. Then he'd produced a piece of parchment, drawn a rough map, and said he'd wait in the library and pretend to be studying, which was close enough to the truth that the pretending would be convincing. This was, Harry had thought, genuinely the most tactically intelligent decision anyone had made all week, and he'd said so, and Blaise had looked fractionally pleased before closing his expression back down. The passage leveled off. Widened. And then the chamber opened. Hermione made a soft sound. Ron said nothing, which from Ron was more expressive than most people's speeches. Daphne came to stand beside Harry and he felt her stillness, not the performed stillness, the real one, the stillness of someone encountering something that is exactly as significant as they anticipated and finding that anticipation and reality meeting cleanly. It was vast. The ceiling was lost in darkness above them. The floor was a shallow river of water, 2 inches deep, spreading wall to wall, perfectly still. Columns rose from it like trees, carved with serpents, and at the far end the statue of Salazar Slytherin looked down at them from an impossible height, grey and massive and wearing the expression of a man who has been waiting for a conversation for 1,000 years and is willing to wait considerably longer. Harry walked toward it. His footsteps sent rings across the water and the rings caught the green torchlight and moved outward in perfect circles, and the chamber listened to each step the way very old things listen, not to the sound but to what made it. The Slytherin ring was incandescent on his finger. Not painfully, it was the same heat as when all 5 aligned, but only the one ring this time, the Slytherin ring alone running hotter than he'd felt it run, because this was its home, this was the heart of the line that had made it, and it recognized the architecture around them with the recognition of a thing returned to where it began. He stopped at the base of the statue. He looked up at Slytherin's stone face. The carved eyes looked back at him, and Harry thought about the memory, the middle-aged man, the careful placement, the Parseltongue ceiling, and he thought about what you'd put here, at the base of yourself, if you were a founder who had revised your understanding of the world and wanted to make sure the revision survived. He crouched. Put his palm flat on the stone floor at the statue's base. The Slytherin ring pulsed. He felt the seam before he saw it, a square section of floor, the stone subtly different in texture, and he said open in Parseltongue and the floor complied. A compartment, stone-lined, the inside dry despite centuries of water above it, protected by the same magic that protected the vault above. Inside, a book. Just one. Bound in dark leather, the serpent and sword crest of the Slytherin family embossed on the cover, the leather worn in the way things worn by thinking hands get worn, unevenly, the spine softened, the corners sharp. And on top of it, a folded piece of parchment that crackled when Harry picked it up. He unfolded it. Read it. Daphne appeared beside him, reading over his shoulder, and he heard her breath change. The handwriting was the same archaic script as the note in the vault. But this was longer. This was a letter meant to be read by whoever found this place through proper means, which was to say through blood and tongue and the willingness to actually come here rather than just know the place existed. If you are reading this you found the other vault first, which means you're careful and patient and did not rush to the larger thing before understanding the smaller one. Good. You have time and you know how to use it. These qualities will matter more than whatever power you carry. The book is the Slytherin Codex. It is not a book of curses or a book of secrets in the dramatic sense. It is a record of every magical system I developed during my life, annotated with my actual understanding of each one, not the simplified versions I taught, not the public versions, the real ones. The Parseltongue magic, the blood ward systems, the Serpens Cognitio, which you almost certainly have already, if the vinculum activated properly, and the one I kept from everyone, including Godric, including Rowena, including Helga. The Eterni Refutatio. The eternal refusal. The counter to what cannot die by claiming it can. I built this castle. I warded it. I put certain things in place that have not been found. I did this because I was afraid, and because I was, in my fear, arrogant enough to believe that my specific bloodline was the only one worthy of understanding these things. I was wrong. I spent the rest of my life knowing I was wrong. The ward I built into the chamber, the Eterni Refutatio, is not in the book. It is in the chamber itself. It is in these walls, in this water, in the stone beneath your feet. I wrote it into the foundations when the school was built, and I have been hoping, for as long as I have been able to hope anything, that someone who understood the full shape of what it was and why I built it would find it before someone who wanted to use the chamber for the thing I originally put it here for. Use the codex. Use the ward. Use the time you have. And tell Godric's descendants, I said, tell them I know I should have stayed. Harry read it twice. Then stood up. The Eterni Refutatio, Daphne said beside him, and her voice was very careful and very precise, the voice she used when she was managing something large. It's in the walls. It's in the walls, Harry confirmed. And it counters, something that cannot die by claiming it can. He looked up at the statue. Which is what's under Quirrell's turban. Ron had come to stand behind them. He'd read the letter over Daphne's shoulder. Harry could tell from the way he was very carefully not making noise, which was Ron's version of processing something too large for immediate commentary. Hermione was already turning the book over in her hands, opening the first pages with the focused reverence of someone handling something extraordinary and knowing it. The Eterni Refutatio, Hermione said, reading. Harry, it's a ward described in the first chapter. Salazar built it as a permanent counter-intrusion for entities that have achieved a form of forced immortality. Specifically, the annotation says for those who have fractured their soul to escape death, the refutatio acts as a completion, it recognizes what is broken and refuses it the ability to reform. She looked up. Soul fracture. Someone who fractured their soul. Harry's Peveril ring, which had been the cool and patient deep note presence for months, was running at a temperature he hadn't felt from it before. Not hot, colder than usual. Cold the way metal is cold when the temperature around it drops sharply. The cold of something that is death's gift, recognizing death's antithesis. He knew the name. He'd known it in the shape of things since the bathroom, since Quirrell's flinch, since the Peveril ring's specific response. He'd been circling it, letting it come forward at its own pace, and now it was here. Voldemort, he said. The chamber took the name and held it, and the water on the floor sent a slow ripple outward from Harry's feet as if the word had weight. He's alive, Ron said. Barely, Harry said. Less than alive. Parasitic. He needs someone to carry him while he recovers enough to act. The stone, whatever's under the trapdoor on the 3rd floor, it's not just being stolen. It's being used to restore him. He looked at the chamber walls, the stone, the water. And Salazar built a counter for this. Into the foundations. Can you activate it? Hermione asked. Harry put his hand on the nearest column. The Slytherin ring blazed. He felt the ward through his palm the way you feel a river through the bank above it, the direction of it, the force of it, the enormous contained potential of a 1,000-year-old piece of magic that had been waiting for someone with the right blood and the right tongue to wake it. It was already partly awake. It had been waking since Harry arrived at Hogwarts in September, since the rings manifested, since the Slytherin lordship recognized its inheritor. The castle had been breathing differently since then, and now he understood what the breath was, the ward, shifting, recognizing, adjusting itself toward activation. Yes, he said. But not from here. I need to be at the ward's anchor point. He felt through the connection. 3rd floor corridor. The trapdoor. They came up through the mirror passage, back into the 2nd floor bathroom, and Harry stood for a moment in the ordinary light of an ordinary Hogwarts bathroom and made a decision. He looked at Ron and Hermione. Get Snape, he said. Ron blinked. Not Dumbledore. Snape first. Harry held Ron's eyes. Dumbledore will contain this, organize it, decide what information I need and what I don't. Snape will do what's right for the castle and the students, and he won't try to manage how I'm involved. He paused. And he's been waiting for something like this. I think part of him has always been waiting for it. Ron and Hermione looked at each other. We'll find him, Hermione said, with the simple decisiveness she produced in emergencies. Where will you be? 3rd floor. Harry, I'll wait, he said. And then, because it was true, I won't do anything without Snape there. But I'm not waiting in the corridor downstairs either. He looked at her directly. I know what's up there. I need to be near it. She held his gaze for a moment. Then nodded. She and Ron went. Harry looked at Daphne. "You don't have to come." "I know," she said, and walked past him toward the stairs. The third-floor corridor was empty. The door was locked. Alhambra opened it without drama, and beyond it the corridor stretched quiet and dark in the way of a place that has had something large removed from it. The three-headed dog was gone. Harry walked to where the trapdoor was and stopped. It was open. Not thrown open, not broken, opened carefully, deliberately, the lock mechanism disengaged cleanly. Someone had come through here already. Recently. The air coming up from below had a cold, foreign quality, and the Peveril ring had gone to its deepest cold, steady as a warning bell. He looked at Daphne. She looked at the trapdoor. Then at him. "He's already down there," she said. Harry knew. He'd known the moment he felt the cold air. "The ward anchor is down there too," he said. "In the chamber below. Quirrell is trying to reach the stone and the anchor point is in the same location because Dumbledore built the protections around the exact point where Slytherin's ward is strongest." He paused. "Which means Dumbledore knows about the ward. Which means he built the defenses here deliberately, not just to protect the stone but to put you in proximity to it," Daphne said. "If you ever needed it." They stared at each other. "He knew," Harry said. "He knew the Peveril line could activate the Slytherin ward. He knew about the vinculum possibility. He put the stone here and warded it in a way that only the heir of Slytherin could access the ward beneath it and," he stopped. "He was trusting me to arrive here on my own. Without being told." "Still managing," Daphne said quietly. "Still managing," Harry agreed. He looked at the trapdoor. "The ward. I can't wait for Snape." He felt through the Slytherin ring, through the castle, through the deep connection to the foundations that had been building since September. "If Quirrell gets to the stone before I activate the Eterni Refutatio, the stone won't matter. Whatever Voldemort is doing through him, go," Daphne said. He looked at her. "Go," she said again, and the grey eyes were direct and certain and entirely without fear. "I'll be at the top of the trapdoor. When Snape comes, tell him everything," Harry said. "Tell him everything," she agreed. He looked at her for one more second. The bond was running at its fullest, warmest, most present since the platform, not pulling at him, not demanding, just there, solid and real and hers. He felt her steady through it. Felt her choosing to be steady specifically so he could feel it. He jumped through the trapdoor. The descent was plant first, a mass of devil's snare that had clearly already been struggled through by someone who hadn't known the counter. Harry didn't struggle. Lumos Maxima from his wand and the plant recoiled immediately, and he dropped through cleanly and landed running. The chambers unfolded as Dumbledore had designed them, winged keys, a chessboard, a troll already unconscious, potions. Harry moved through each one with the efficiency of someone who had read enough about magical puzzles to understand their underlying logic, and the 5 rings calibrated each challenge as he approached it, Ravenclaw for the keys pattern, Gryffindor Potter instinct for the chess solution that didn't require playing the whole game, Slytherin precision for the potions. He didn't stop to admire any of it. At the final door, the mirror of Eriste. And Quirrell. The teacher was standing before the mirror with his back to the door, his hands raised, muttering something urgent and fragmented in Latin that had the quality of commands rather than requests. On the mirror's surface Harry could see the reflection, not his own, not yet, but Quirrell's, and in Quirrell's reflection a second face overlaid it, and the second face was not Quirrell's and not human and was looking at the mirror with a hunger that was old and total and had nothing in it that was interested in anything except what it wanted. The Peveril ring was colder than Harry had felt it. Not painful. Absolute. The cold of a thing that is as far from death resistance as physics allows. Harry walked into the room. Quirrell spun. His face, Quirrell's face, the stammering nervous face, was gone. What was underneath was still technically Quirrell but stripped of everything performed, just the eyes, intelligent and terrified and owned, the face of a man who had long since lost the argument about his own body. "Potter," he said, and the stammer was completely absent. "I was wondering how long." "Since Halloween," Harry said, and stopped 10 feet away. "You let in the troll." "It was meant to be a better distraction." Quirrell tilted his head, and the movement was wrong, slightly too fluid, like the puppeteer adjusting the strings. "He didn't think you'd figure it out so quickly. He thought, a child, a famous child, soft from being famous, not particularly famous where I grew up," Harry said. He looked at the mirror. "You can't get the stone. The mirror won't give it to someone who wants to use it." "I know." Quirrell's eyes went to Harry's hands, to the rings, and the face did something that wasn't Quirrell's expression, a recoiling, internal, the puppeteer flinching where the puppet couldn't. "He knows what you are. He's known since September. Since the rings appeared." A pause. "He's afraid of you." "Good," Harry said. "He wants to tell you something," Quirrell said, and the wrongness deepened, the too fluid quality moving from his neck to his shoulders as something shifted beneath the turban. "I don't want to hear it," Harry said. "He says, I genuinely don't care," Harry said pleasantly. "Whatever he wants to offer, whatever he wants to threaten, whatever version of join me or else he's prepared, I've heard the shape of it from Lucius Malfoy and I wasn't interested then either." He looked directly at the mirror. "I'm going to activate the Eterni Refutatio now. You should probably step back." Quirrell moved, fast, wand up, and the spell he cast was not a first-year disarming charm or a simple curse. It was dark and it was aimed at Harry's chest and it was serious. Harry moved the Slytherin ring and the Serpens Cognitio told him the angle before the spell left the wand, and he stepped left and the curse hit the stone wall behind him and left a scar in the rock and he felt it pass close enough to register as heat. He didn't stun Quirrell. That wasn't the answer, stunning Quirrell stunned the vessel, not the passenger. He walked to the mirror instead. He put his hand on its frame. The mirror's surface rippled. His reflection appeared, not distorted, not wish-fulfilling, just Harry, but the Harry in the mirror was wearing the 5 rings and all 5 rings were lit, the full convergence that he'd felt in the corridor with Flint and in the bathroom with the troll but deeper now, fuller, the note held at its longest and clearest, and in the reflection's hand was the Philosopher's Stone, and then the Real Harry felt it drop into his actual pocket and didn't look away from the mirror. He found the anchor point. It wasn't visible, it was felt, through the Slytherin ring, through the floor, through the 1,000-year-old ward that ran through the castle's foundations like a circulatory system. The anchor was here because this was the deepest point in Dumbledore's protection construction, and Dumbledore had built here not just because it was deep but because the ward was here, and the ward was here because Salazar Slytherin had, in the last decades of his life, put it in the absolute center of the thing he'd built. Harry crouched. Put both palms flat on the stone floor. Quirrell's second spell hit the mirror and shattered it, and pieces of spelled glass flew outward and Harry felt 2 of them cut the back of his right hand, and the blood that welled up ran warm across the Slytherin ring and the Potter ring simultaneously and the ward ignited. Not dramatically. Not with light or sound or theatrical display. It ignited the way a deep thing activates, from the inside out, from the foundations upward, moving through the castle like warmth moves through stone when the sun has been on it for a long time. Harry felt it travel, down through the chamber floor, out into the foundations, upward through the walls, through every corridor and room and tower, the entire castle becoming for one long second something aware in a way it was usually only partially aware, and in the center of that awareness was the Eterni Refutatio, a ward built by a man who had understood what broken things looked like because he had been responsible for some of the breaking. The ward found what it was looking for. Quirrell screamed. Not Quirrell, the scream was from the wrong place, originating not in the throat but in the space around the turban, and the turban fell away and what was beneath it was a face that Harry had known was there without being able to look it directly. A face that was barely a face, unfinished, parasitic, eyes red and furious and afraid in the way that only things that have spent decades being afraid of death while claiming immunity to it can be afraid. The Eterni Refutatio saw it. The ward didn't harm it, it didn't burn or destroy or strike. It did what Slytherin had named it for. It refused. It found the fracture in the soul and recognized it the way a surgeon recognizes a break, precisely, specifically, without drama, and it said, in the language of ancient magic that Harry felt rather than heard, this is incomplete. This is a piece that cannot function alone. This cannot remain. Voldemort's face turned to Harry. The red eyes found him, and what was in them was hatred and recognition, and below both of those was fear, the specific fear of something that has spent a century believing itself beyond consequence, encountering something that says no in a language older than your power. The boy, with the rings, the voice was barely a voice, shredded and diminished. You cannot, this is not possible, the Slytherin ward was supposed to be, it was supposed to be mine. He revised his notes, Harry said. The ward pressed. Not violently, with the inexorable quality of water finding its level, or time moving forward. The fragment of soul that had attached itself to Quirinus Quirrell could not maintain its hold against the completion demand of the Eterni Refutatio, and it knew this, and it was afraid, and the fear was real and large and oddly satisfying to witness. This is not over, the voice said, and it was now so diminished it was almost nothing. I will come back. I always come back. You cannot kill what, I'm not killing you, Harry said. The ward is refusing you. There's a difference. He held the cold Peveril ring against the floor and felt Death's gift understand the distinction perfectly. It wasn't ending the fragment, it was refusing it shelter. Refusing it the castle, refusing it Quirrell, refusing it the stone. Refusing it completion. The face tore away from Quirrell's head. It moved, upward, through the stone ceiling, through the castle, and Harry tracked it through the ward as it went, felt the ward escort it outward through the foundations and then beyond them, into the grounds, into the night, and then it was gone, expelled and incomplete and diminished, moving away from Hogwarts through the dark with the speed of something that has been refused and knows the refusal is absolute and is looking for somewhere else to go. Harry let out a breath. Quirrell crumpled. Harry crossed to him in 3 steps and knelt beside him. The teacher's face was drained of color, shaking, his eyes unfocused. Without the passenger Quirrell was simply a man who had made terrible choices and was now experiencing their full weight without the buffer of possession. He looked at Harry with eyes that were his own again, and what was in them was exhaustion and something that might have been relief. Is he? Quirrell started. Gone, Harry said. From here. From you. Quirrell closed his eyes. I'm sorry, he said. I am sorry. I know it doesn't, don't, Harry said, not unkindly. We'll sort the rest out. Can you sit up? He helped Quirrell to sitting and stood, and the mirror was shattered around them and the chamber was quiet and the ward ran steady through the foundations like a heartbeat, settled and permanent. The Peveril ring was warming again, slowly, from its deepest cold back toward its normal deep note patience. Death's gift satisfied that what had claimed immunity had been, at least for now, refused. He took the Philosopher's Stone from his pocket. It was warm. Ruby red and dense and completely unremarkable looking, the kind of thing you'd mistake for a polished stone on a garden path. He held it for a moment and thought about what it could do and what it was worth and the fact that he had absolutely no use for it and no interest in keeping it. He thought about Dumbledore. Then he thought about what Daphne had said. Still managing. He kept the stone for now. Snape arrived through the trapdoor with Daphne 7 minutes later, and McGonagall 2 minutes after that, and Dumbledore a minute after McGonagall, and the chamber filled with adults and controlled urgency and the specific organized calm of people who are very alarmed and refusing to show it. Dumbledore looked at Quirrell first. Then at Harry. Then at the shattered mirror. Then, with the deliberateness of a man reading a room, at the ward he could apparently feel running through the floor, warm and settled and permanent. His expression went through several things. The Eterni Refutatio, he said quietly. You knew about it, Harry said. Directly. Not accusatorially, just accurate. Dumbledore looked at him. The half-moon glasses and the measured smile, and behind them the real thing, which was a man who was brilliant and deeply tired and very genuinely fond of Harry, and also had been arranging pieces on a board without fully disclosing the game. "I knew it existed," Dumbledore said carefully. "I didn't know if it could be activated." The references were fragmentary. "Salazar left a complete manual in the chamber," Harry said. "The Slytherin Codex. It's been there for 1,000 years." He held Dumbledore's gaze pleasantly. Fragmentary references might have been more complete if someone had looked in the obvious place. McGonagall made a sound that was carefully neutral and conveyed nothing whatsoever about her private opinion. Snape was looking at Harry with an expression that was the most open Harry had seen on his face, still controlled, still precise, but the control was different, the thing behind it closer to the surface. Something in it that was satisfied in a way that lived deeper than anything today, deeper than this year. Satisfied in a way that had been waiting for something for a long time. "The stone," Dumbledore said. Harry held it out. "I'd like to discuss what happens to it," he said. "But I'm giving it to you now because I trust you to hold it tonight, and I want the conversation to happen when Quirrell has been seen to and everyone is less immediate." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "I do want the conversation." Dumbledore took the stone with hands that were steady. "You shall have it," he said, and this time the smile and the thing beneath it were aligned. Whatever was operating behind those half-moon glasses, in this moment, was genuine. "Harry. What you have done tonight, activated a ward someone else built," Harry said. "The credit mostly goes to a man who spent centuries regretting something and decided to do something useful about it instead." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. And then he laughed, a real one, caught off guard, full and warm and briefly young. "Yes," he said. "I suppose it does." The walk back up was quieter than the descent. Quirrell was levitated by Snape with the impersonal care of a man doing a necessary task, and McGonagall had sent her Patronus ahead for the hospital wing. Dumbledore walked with the purposeful calm of someone processing an enormous amount of information and choosing his order of operations. Harry walked behind all of them and felt the ward running steady through the castle, the Eterni Refutatio permanent and awake and carrying the intention of its architect through foundations that had been waiting for it to be completed for 1,000 years. Daphne fell into step beside him on the first staircase up. They didn't speak for a while. The bond was as warm as it had been in the chamber before he dropped through the trapdoor, full and real and present, both of them settled in it rather than surprised by it. "You felt when the ward activated," she said. "Not a question." "I felt you feel it," he said. "Through the bond. It's connected to the Slytherin line in both directions." She was quiet for a moment. "It went through me like something closing. Like something that was open and uncomfortable has been resolved." She paused. The greengrass line was connected to the dormant ward too. The Slytherin blood. It would have been a pressure. Like the lordship. Another thing being carried. "Is it gone now?" "Yes." She said it simply. "Yes. It's gone." He looked at her profile in the torchlight of the staircase, the composed line of her, the small particular expression she had when she was telling the truth without armor around it. "Daphne." She looked at him. "The bond," he said. "I'm not going to pretend I understand all of what it is. I don't think either of us does yet. But," he stopped. "Tried again. I trust it. The way I told you I did on the pitch. I trust it, and I trust you, and I want you to know that those two things are different and both of them are true." The staircase was empty except for them, moving between levels, and the castle was breathing its ordinary breath around them, settled and alive. "I know," she said. The same two words she'd used on the bench in the Slytherin stands, carrying the same weight of trust. She looked forward and her expression was entirely unguarded for a moment, and the almost smile went to 3/3. Actually 3/3. A real one. "You're not what I expected," she said. "When I got up off that platform floor." "What did you expect?" Something less, she said. Everyone is usually something less when you look at them properly. Harry thought about that. I'll try not to become less, he said. Don't try, she said. Just be what you are. She said it with the matter-of-fact directness that was her specific brand of honesty and that he had come to understand was a more intimate thing from her than long speeches from most other people. That's been sufficient so far. They came up to the second floor and the corridor, and ahead of them McGonagall and Dumbledore and Snape and Quirrell on his levitation charm were moving toward the hospital wing, and the castle was warm and lit and permanent around them, and Harry felt the 5 rings settled and even on his hands, cooled from the activation, resting. He felt the ward in the foundations. Permanent now. Awake now. 1,000-year-old refusal, complete at last. He felt the bond to Daphne, warm and directional and real. He felt the philosopher's stone-shaped absence from his pocket, and the small uncomplicated satisfaction of having given it back without being asked to. And he felt, somewhere in the castle's breathing, the character of a year that had started on a platform with an accident and a split lip and a half-second of guileless contact, and had arrived here, to a chamber beneath a chamber, to a ward in the foundations, to a face in the dark that had said you cannot kill what cannot die and been told, very simply, that wasn't the question being asked. The question being asked was whether 1,000 years of waiting had produced something worth waiting for. Harry thought, with the specific, grounded, cupboard-formed certainty of someone who has had a lot of time to develop accurate self-assessment, that the answer was probably yes. 3 weeks later, with exams approaching and the castle resettling from the turbulence of the year, Harry sat in the Slytherin vault with the codex in his lap. He'd been given use of it by general agreement of the 4 of them, with the stipulation from Hermione that she got to read every chapter the day after Harry did, and from Blaise that anything tactically relevant got summarized at their weekly library meetings. Daphne had made no stipulation, which was its own statement about where they'd arrived. He was working through the chapter on Parseltongue magic, specifically the sections on what Slytherin had called deep speech, not the basic communication he'd used with the grass snake, but the ward language, the magic activation language, the version that had woken the vault and lit the chamber and activated the Eterni Refutatio. He was annotating in the margins, in his own handwriting, in the space Slytherin had left at the edges of each page as if expecting this, as if knowing his inheritor would have thoughts. The serpent ring moved on his finger. Content. Home. He heard the passage open behind him and didn't look up. McGonagall wants to know, Ron's voice said, bouncing oddly in the stone chamber, if you'll consider the Quidditch exemption for second year. Since you're obviously going to be on the team and the exemption is technically available if a student has demonstrated exceptional, tell her yes, Harry said, still reading. Just yes. Yes please, Harry said. Tell her yes please. A pause. He could feel Ron looking around the chamber with the expression he always had when he came down here, the mixture of awe and mild discomfort that he managed very gamely. Also Hermione says the restricted section has a book about deep Parseltongue that Snape apparently put there himself, and she wants to know if you can get her access. I can get her access, Harry said. Tell her to come to Snape's office with me Thursday. She's going to be impossibly excited about that, Ron said. She's going to be appropriately excited, Harry corrected. Hermione is always appropriately excited. She just has a high baseline. Ron laughed. The sound bounced in the chamber and the serpent carvings above shifted in their slow loop and the torches burned green and steady and old. Coming up for dinner. Harry closed the codex. Looked at the cover, the serpent and sword. The man who had built this castle and regretted part of what he'd built into it and spent the rest of his life putting the correction somewhere a better inheritor could find it. Tell Godric's descendants I said, tell them I know I should have stayed. He'd thought about that line more than any other. Not the magic, not the ward, not the codex, that line. The human thing. The person who had made a mistake large enough to shape 1,000 years of history and whose final recorded wish was that someone would pass on an apology to his oldest friend. He was going to spend a lot of time with this book. He was going to understand everything in it, and use what was worth using, and leave what wasn't, and he was going to do it the way Slytherin had apparently spent his final decades doing things, with revision in mind, with the understanding that the first version of anything is not always the right one. "Yeah," Harry said, standing, tucking the codex into his bag. "Coming." He walked through the passage, up into the dungeon corridor, the walls sealing behind him, the green torches back to their ordinary stations. Up the stairs, into the castle's warmth. Daphne was in the entrance hall when they came up, waiting with her bag in the particular quality of someone who has decided to wait for something rather than go ahead, which from Daphne was a statement. Blaise was beside her, and Hermione had appeared from somewhere with her own bag and the look of someone who'd been told about the Thursday library appointment and was visibly organizing her questions. They went to dinner together. The four of them, and the castle breathing around them, and the ward in the foundations running warm and permanent, and the 5 rings settled on Harry's hands like instruments he was learning, still learning, and would probably spend years learning, and that was fine. He had years. He had the rings and the bond and the vault and the codex and the castle that knew his footsteps. He had people who had chosen to stand beside him, not because the rings demanded it, not because the blood bond required it, not because the politics made it advantageous, but because they had looked at what he was and made a decision. He sat down at the Gryffindor table. The enchanted ceiling showed a clear December sky, stars coming out in the early dark, and the great hall was warm with voices and the smell of food and the particular alive quality that large groups of young people in a warm building generate without thinking about it. Harry looked at his rings in the candlelight. Potter gold. Slytherin silver green. Black iron. Peveril dark. Ravenclaw clear. 5 houses. 5 names. 5 inheritances that had found each other through a collision on a platform and a half-second of guileless contact, and a girl who had turned around on the ground and looked at him with grey eyes that were calculating the weight of the world they'd both just landed in. He was 11 years old. He had homework and Quidditch next year and a second year that was probably going to be significantly complicated and a codex full of ancient magic that was going to take years to understand and a political situation with the Malfoy family that wasn't finished by a long measure, and somewhere out in the dark beyond the castle walls, something diminished and afraid was looking for somewhere to go and planning, in its diminished and afraid way, to come back. Let it come back. He'd be here. He was going to be here for 7 years, learning everything there was to learn, and he was going to be ready, and he wasn't going to hide or flinch or apologize for what he carried. He'd grown up in a cupboard. He knew the difference between a small dark place that held you in and a large dark place that you could move through. He knew that the difference between surviving and living was what you chose to carry and what you chose to set down. He'd set down fear a long time ago. He had no plans to pick it back up. The food appeared. Ron reached for everything within arm's reach. Hermione opened a notebook. Across the hall, Daphne turned a page. Blaise said something to her that made her reply in one sentence without looking up, and Blaise's expression did the thing it did when she'd said something he privately found funny and wasn't going to admit. Harry ate his dinner. The Peveril ring was warm for the first time since October. Not the cold watchful temperature, not the alert cold of Voldemort's presence. Just warm. Patient and deep and warm, the way things are warm when they are where they belong. Death's gift, resting. Outside, the December night settled over Hogwarts and the stars came fully out and the ward in the foundations ran its steady permanent note through the castle's bones, and Harry Potter, Lord of 5 noble houses, heir of 3 founders, 11 years old and entirely unafraid, sat in the great hall and looked at the stars through the enchanted ceiling and thought, Year 2 is going to be interesting. He was right.